Good morning. My name is Scott Lee, and I am an alcoholic. If you would, I'd like to open the session with a few moments of silence. Amen. So we've completed the third step prayer. And just come up off of our knees, and I like to tell the new guy that you're going to hear the discussion rage in the fellowship when to do a four-step. You'll hear people say, don't do a four-step too soon, you may drink. I've never seen that. I've seen a few 100,000 way too late. Or you'll hear them say, do one step a year. But they're not going to be able to tell you what page that's on, or they haven't been able to tell me anyway. I mean, you wouldn't want to get well too soon. And, you get this all big bugaboo. The fourth step is, there are no surprises. You're the one that did all of this. I think it's important to have a sponsor. It was for me, because if I don't have a sponsor on this, I will do a searchless and fearing moral inventory, not knowing what that is. And I'm asked sometimes what I think about writing the story of your life. I think it's a great idea. Hope you do a four-step also. I think you'll find the four-step will change your life. I'm not sure the autobiography will. I know that the actual four-step will. So I say the book does not tell us when to do a four-step. It makes two time references. And I give all the leeway that the big book does. So as far as I'm concerned, you can use either of the two time references the book uses or anything that lies between. Does that seem fair to everybody? Okay. So I ask him to read. We begin at the bottom of page 63. It says, next. I say, whoa, time out. That is a time reference. Next. So that's like we're just coming off our knees. Next. We launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which was personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Our decision was a vital, from the Latin vita meaning life. Vital means necessary to life. Vital and crucial step may have little permanent effect unless at once. Wait a minute, that's a time reference. At once. So the fourth step is either done next, or at once, or anywhere in between. I give them all the leeway the book gives. Followed by the strenuous efforts to face and be rid. Isn't that interesting? Be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. And if I'm going to do that at step 4, if all I do in step 4 is write, I will be rid of ink, paper, and time. And none of those are blocking me. So it must be that there are things other than writing involved in step 4, since none of those will help remove what's blocking me. It is those other things that are life-changing in step 4. Although there is writing involved in step 4, it has, in my opinion and experience, very little therapeutic effect. It is the observations and prayers that are life-changing. Observation meaning not what I notice as I go zipping along writing, but what it tells me specifically to look for. We're going to talk about that in detail probably over the next 2 hours. To be rid of the things in ourselves that have been blocking us. Skipping down to the next paragraph, a business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Most of the businesses that I've ever dealt with do a computer inventory every night. That's the evening portion of step 11. Step 10 being about being present in my own life moment by moment. Evening portion 11, a rather formal inventory at night, is the last thing. But once a year, these businesses do a full teardown inventory. Sometimes it's more than once a year, but it's always at least once a year. That's the reference. That's what I do. I discovered resentments that were over 25 years old on my 8th four-step, sober somewhere around 10 years. I know I've got some very good friends who have great programs, in my opinion, who believe you do the first 9 once and stay sober in the last 3. That's fine if that's what they want to do. The evidence in my life is I continue to find things with this annual house cleaning. And at 24 years, I think I've done 22 of these. I've missed a couple of times. Commercial inventory is fact-finding, fact-facing process, an effort to discover the truth about the stock and trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods to get rid of. Get rid of is so important, they told us twice on this page. Get rid of them promptly. We did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup, which caused our failure. There's the good news again. I'm the problem. Being convinced itself, manifest in various ways, was what had defeated us. We considered its common manifestations. As I understand step 4 out of the basic text, the 3 manifestations of self we are going to inventory are resentment, fear, and sexual misconduct. I claim that there is not a sex inventory in this book. I don't see where we inventory the bright side. I don't find the direction that says, at this point, write down all the things in the sexual arena that you did were right and good. So we inventory only the dark side, and I don't like the idea of sex having a bad name. My favorite toy. I mean, come on. So now what we're going to do is, here I am with my new guy again, searching for directions on how to do step 4. And we're going to find about 26 of them, and we're going to do them one at a time. That's the next couple hours. Resentment's the number one offender. Number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. We just threatened your life. We're going to do it a lot. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. We've been not only mentally and physically ill, we've been spiritually sick. When the spiritual maladies overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. It makes me think the spiritual one's the most important one. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. That's a general description. They're going to tell me exactly now how to set them on paper. It says we listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we are angry. We need a list. And we don't need to know what the second direction is till we finish the first one. A list is a series of words and phrases that run down a page. I don't think I've ever seen a list that ran across the page. Lists run down the page. And now we need a list of everything and everyone you have ever been angry with. Ever. Erase the word resentment from your mind. You don't know what it means in your case. What we're looking for is a list of people, institutions, or principles, that is to say anything, with whom we were, that's any time in the past, angry. That's what I need, is a list now. And I say, now you're probably wondering what color paper you should use, what color ink. Were you wondering that? Some of them say, yeah. The book's not specific about that. On page 67, about 10 lines from the bottom, it says we placed them before us in black and white. That's not very specific. That doesn't say black ink and white paper. Clearly that could be black paper and white ink. I'm willing to go either way with you on that. And I think and I've had so far 2 guys go to the art store. They buy an inch thick of black paper, 2 pens are right with white ink. I'm good with that. Bob thinks this is ridiculous. I agree with him. This is asinine, and I absolutely require it. I don't want to let myself off the hook on any of this. Because the little bitty thing I say, I don't really have to do that, might have been the one that would have saved my life. So if I sponsor you, do your inventory with black pen or pencil on white paper, or black paper and white ink. I'm good either way. And let's talk a little bit about what that looks like and when we're going to do it. The easy way, I think, is to get a spiral notebook. On the first page of it, I'd like you to write something subtle, like, this is my 4th step, put it down. If I find you with it, I will kill you and hide your body. Something subtle and yet that conveys the message. And then the next page is, for me, it's actually a double page. The way I do this is 4 columns. And so we open to a double page, write the number 1 above the margin on the left-hand page, a 2 around over the middle of the left-hand page, the 3 and the 4 split the right-hand page. And now I need a list. And the list is made up of everybody and everything you can think of that's ever made you mad, ever. So let's start the first. Write a name, skip a line, write a name, skip a line, write a name, skip a line. When you get to the bottom of the page, you have to turn the page. You can't write on the right-hand page. We're going to need that. Write 1, 2, 3, 4, and just keep them coming. Just keep them coming. Now, for those of you who cheated and looked ahead and know that the next direction has to do with what they did, and you're planning to leave 10 pages for your father, the answer to the question is write 1 name and skip 1 line, and don't list anybody more than once. We're going to talk about why in a couple of minutes. I think it's just critically important. Let's talk about when. There are 168 hours in a week. If you have a 40-hour week job and a 30-minute commute each way, that's 45 hours gone. 8 hours a night of sleep is 56 more. I want you to spend about 15 hours a week on meetings. That's a little travel time, a little hangout before, a little hangout after. 3 hours a week on recreation, a round of golf, play some tennis, something like that. 2 hours to mow the lawn, do your melon list. They get the melon list up here? Honey, do this, honey, do that, the melon list. 5 hours a week reading spiritual literature. I require of myself and the men I sponsor to read 2 pages a day in the big book. We start at Roman numeral 11, go through 164. I read my 2 this morning. You can't find all the new stuff if you don't stay current in the book, okay? And there's not new stuff, but I read it with new eyes. Is what happens. Some other spiritual literature. 3 hours a week to bathe, shave. 4 hours for a date with your wife if you're fortunate enough to still be in the house. If not, maybe you can coach a little league team. Do something in the plus column. 5 hours on the telephone with me and some men whose names and numbers I will give you. I will pick them for you. 12 hours a week to cook and eat food. 1 hour to shop for groceries, clothes, get a haircut. 5 hours in prayer and meditation. 9 hours watching TV. That's 3 ball games. That's enough. That's 165 hours gone out of a 168-hour week. You got 3 hours left. I want half. It varies. I need to know about his life. I sponsor a guy when I got to this part. His wife had a fabulous job, and he's a stay-at-home dad with a 1-year-old 5 days a week. And the kid sleeps from 1 till 3 in the afternoon for a nap every day. He's got 5 days where he's sitting there by himself in the house with a 1-year-old for 2 hours. For him, 10 hours a week. Let's negotiate it. And I want you to call me every Sunday, and I want the schedule. And Monday, Wednesday, and Friday's not a schedule. Monday from 9 o'clock p.m. till 9:30 p.m. is a schedule. I want it scheduled. Time and date. Like anything else on my schedule, it's subject to change. It's not subject to cancellation. I had it scheduled Saturday afternoon at 2. I didn't know the kid had a Little League game. I went to the Little League game, and I slipped it till 7 o'clock that night. I don't even need a phone call on that. What I need to know, when I started to do my first one, I gave myself the assignment of completing a step 4. It put me in perfect position to hate myself till it was done because I hadn't completed the assignment. When my sponsor and I can agree on how much time and when I should work on this 4-step each week, and I do that each week, I can feel good about myself because I'm in process. And I will always be in process somehow. I think for me it's a better mindset. I also like to tell him that we are not saving a special alcove in Akron at the AA Hall of Fame for your 4-step. Right? You have my permission to do a poor 4-step. That anything worth doing is worth doing poorly as you learn to do it. You're not going to get this perfect. I don't expect you to. You have my permission not to. As a matter of fact, to be completely honest with you, our home group does not give a trophy every year for the best 4-step. This is the trophy you are not going to get. For those too far back, it says 4-step trophy never awarded. This is the trophy you ain't getting. And you can have your photo made with this for a very small price here at the break. This is all about a mindset of you don't have to do it perfectly. Because if I have to do it perfectly, I can't do it at all. It's not permission to screw up on purpose. It's permission to be human. And then we sit down and write a name, skip a line, write a name, skip a line. When you get to the bottom of the page, turn the page and just keep them coming. When they slow down, when you can sit for 15 or 20 seconds and not think of anyone or anything, then we'll move on to direction 2. In the meantime, some of them you'll be unsure of. The rule is when in doubt, write it out. Better to put it down and discover later it isn't actually a problem than to not write it down and later have it kill you. Let's see now. Not a problem later, a little ink, a little time, or kill me. So let's pick by what the penalty is going to be. So when in doubt, write it out. When you get to the end and can't think of any more, there's a direction at the bottom of page 65 says we went back through our lives. So that indicates that I use a reverse chronology. I like the idea of just download, just dump them first. But then let's go back through my life. Now, I live here. I'm married to Miss Linda, the most fabulous woman on the planet. I work for these people. This is where my home is, my church, my home group. This is what my life looks like. So I searched that for things that have ever made me angry. But 16 years ago, I was married to, and I worked for those other guys, and I lived in this other place and so on. And then before that, I lived in this other town. And before that, I was in the Air Force, and I was stationed at this place. And I go back through my life prayerfully. I want this 30-minute session that you're going to do to start with 5 minutes of prayer and meditation. Ask God for clarity of mind to find what He'd have you find and the courage to write it down and anything else you want to do. But I want you to open with 5 minutes of prayer and then 25 minutes of writing. And we can negotiate that. I sponsor a guy right now who's coming up on 2 years in a couple of days. And when we got to this, he's one of these get up at 5 o'clock in the morning thing because he's always awake. And he wants to work on it for an hour each morning, 5 days a week. Great. As long as we can agree on it. And all of a sudden your boss is coming into town for a whole week and you're going to start with breakfast and run through dinner and 9:30 at night. Can't work on your 4-step this week? I agree on the front end. I agree when you tell me on Sunday that you have a reason that you can't work on it this week. I get reasons on the front end. I get excuses on the back end. Bring me the reason up front, I'm easy. Bring me the excuse later, you don't want to see it. That's how I do it. When we get to your earliest memory, we are finished with the first column. Is it complete? No. No chance at all. No chance. But we're through with it for now. At this point, I want you to carry writing materials with you all the time because you're going to be walking through the grocery store. You're going to look down at the cantaloupe and say, here's the look. She said, just write it down. Just write it down. We'll add it to the list. We got plenty of room. Now we search. Having done the first column, completed, now we search for direction 2. Cleverly concealed in the book in the next sentence. We asked ourselves why we were angry. We take a look at the example on the facing page. I'm resentful at Mr. Brown. Under the cause, it says, I'm on page 65. His attention to my wife, told my wife of my mistress, Brown may get my job at the office. If you would, begin with the word office and count backwards, just the words under the cause. Can somebody give me a number, how many words that is? $19. Yeah. It's easy to miss of and the. That's what go backwards sometimes. 19 words. Let's look at what this Brown fella did. He's messing with his wife. Has told his wife about his girlfriend. I bet that was fun. That's got to have been a great day. And, by the way, trying to get him fired. He got 19 words. 19 words. That's still a misdemeanor. And so, column 2, you have, if you're doing it this way, at column 2, you've got from the margin over to the spiral and the entire line below it on which you can write 19 words or fewer. 19 words or fewer, it's a summary, right? It doesn't start out saying it was a rainy Wednesday afternoon. No. I got a phone call years ago on a Sunday evening from a girl in my home group, and she says, I'm just crazy. I said, what's the matter? She said, my boss and I had a big fight on Friday, and I've been four-stepping about it all weekend. No, she hadn't. She'd been taking his inventory, hating him on paper. That's not what this is about. This is a summary. My second column reads like this. Left me for another guy. Screwed me in a business deal. Left me for another guy. Next, the high school football coach. Didn't play me as much as I deserved. Left me for another guy. There are patterns. Right, but it's brief. Next, my father beat me down so hard that at 65 years old, I still have problems with authority figures. I have trouble telling people things they don't want to hear. 19 words or less. If I sponsor you, I'll tell you don't write the 20th word. If you've got somebody that's done more than this to you, call me and we'll negotiate whether you can write the 20th word. I'll be glad to talk about it. I'll tell you I've never given it up. I'm willing to talk about it. Truth is, I've never been called. You wouldn't call me after this, would you? No, they don't either. So we work down the page. The hardest thing, I used to give these first 3 directions together, and they work across the page. There are 2 very good reasons to work down the page. The first one is the book said a list run down the page. The second one is if you work across the page, if you write the name and what they did and then what it affected, it tends to make the resentment flare. And we're not trying to make it flare. We're trying to excise it. We're going to dig this baby out of here. That's what we're here for. That's what's going to happen in step 4. Bottom of column 2, we now look for the third direction at the top of page 65 on our grudge list. We said opposite each name, our injuries, was it our? Self-esteem, security, ambitions, personal or sex relations. 5-part multiple choice. Some will only get 1, some will get 2 or 3, some may get all 5. Some you may not be able to figure out. Call your sponsor and they'll help you see why it was self-esteem. Because on the first one, they all will be. My last 2 inventories, security has gotten the most ink. It's been a real change for me, and they haven't taken long. For me, the most powerful part of step 4 is the actions between the 3rd and 4th columns. That is where the rubber meets the road. And bottom of the page, nothing counted but thoroughness is honesty. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. These are some observations that I was referring to. We're going to consider it carefully. They're going to tell us how. First thing apparent was the world of people were often quite wrong. I don't let them spend much time on that. The chances are you have spent the last 10 to 20 years on bar stools with some of the other great philosophers of our era covering this exact subject. So we don't need to give this a lot of time, all right? To keep it moving, the next paragraph, it's plain that a life that includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. Is that plain to you? Do you see that? Have you ever seen a life that was happy, joyous, free, and full of deep resentment? It's a combination that does not occur. So this is an indictment of resentment. This is the second one. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile? Squander means to throw away with no help of getting anything positive back. Did you ever sit in class and hate them when you should have been listening? Did you ever lay awake at night and plan their demise and what you're going to do to them instead of sleeping? Did you squander hours that might have been worthwhile? But with the alcoholic whose hope, and we're going to tell you what your hope is. The maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience. Growth means that what I've already got may be insufficient for next year. I must remain in the growth mode. I believe maintenance means two things. Maintenance means I must maintain. I can't backslide at all. It also means I must maintenance my spiritual experience in the same sense that I maintenance my vehicle. I rotate the tires. I keep the right pressure in them. I change the oil. I wash it. I maintenance my spiritual condition. I pray. I meditate. I put your blinker on near me in traffic. I'll let you in. That's a very spiritual thing for me. I attend a lot of meetings. I have the high honor and privilege of taking meetings into treatment centers and jails. I'm faithful to my wife. I'm trying to be a good father. I'm a fabulous grandfather. I'm doing those things to maintenance my spiritual condition. So my hope is the maintenance and growth of my spiritual experience. It says this business of resentment is infinitely grave. Infinitely grave. I think we just threatened your life. I think we're going to do it 7 times on this page. For when harboring such feelings, not so much when having such feelings. When harbor means to give a safe place to nurture. I'm okay if I have a resentment. I'm not okay if I'm harboring it. And the directions for not harboring are coming at the bottom of this page. We shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns. We drink again. Well, that's to drink is to die. We just killed you again. That's 2. If we were to live, this is only for the ones that want to live. Everybody else can go on to lunch. If we were to live, we just killed you again. That's 3. We had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. Very confused by that when I first read it. I got a piece of information. About the time this book was being written, one of the most creative men that ever lived, named Walt Disney, would sit his team around a table, and they would spit out ideas for Mickey Mouse cartoons. And you say something that reminded her of something, she thinks something reminded him, and I think of something, and there it would be. And he named his process brainstorming. Has absolutely nothing to do with the word brainstorm as you see it written in the text. Bob and I have both dug into dictionaries from the 1930s and earlier. And brainstorm, the one I looked up said brainstorm meant transient, violent mental outburst. That's rage. That is rage. Has nothing to do with the creative process. So if we look at what it's really telling us here, there are 2 kinds of anger, the grouch or the slow burn, the brainstorm or rage. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be, is this thin? They may be the dubious luxury for normal men, but for alcoholics these things are, we killed you again. We turned back to the list for it held the key to the future. Now this is a subtle death. Does that mean if I don't find the key to the future, I don't have a future? Yes, that's what that means. Found the key to the future. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. Entirely different from what? Well, the last time we looked at the list was at the bottom of the preceding page where it said the first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. We have been looking at where they were wrong right up until now. And now I must prepare myself to look at it from an entirely different angle. You want to take it from there for a while?
Okay. I'm Bob, an alcoholic. Some guys and gals, I think guys more so, have difficulty identifying resentments. The ego doesn't want to admit that anyone could hurt us, right? Sometimes the ego is cunning, baffling, and powerful, and it's clever. And if it reads ahead, so it knows amends are coming, right? So, no, I don't resent those people because you kind of you get it, oh no. If that's a resentment, that might cost me money. No, that's not a resentment. So some of us have a hard time identifying this. Years ago, I had a guy ask me to sponsor him who was sober actually a year longer than I was. I was probably 22 years sober at the time. He was 23. And he was 23 years sober with the benefit of step none. And he was going to kill himself with 23 years of sobriety. and which was perfectly all right for him. He was glad to kill himself. The problem, and the reason he came to me, is that if he was going to die, the obsession to drink returned. He figured, if I'm going to kill myself, I might as well do it drunk. And the idea of him dying and everyone knew that he didn't have 23 years of sobriety made him crazy. He didn't mind dying. He just didn't want to look like he was wrong after he's dead, right? Right. His ego actually saved his life. And his ego brought him to the table, and we started going through the steps. And we just finished the third step on his knees, and we started telling him about the fourth step. I said, I want you to make a list of your resentments. Well, he's kind of a blustery guy, uptight, blustery, ex-Navy chief. One of those kind of guys that always talks to you with his arms like this. And I said, I want you to make a list of your resentments. And he says, resentments? I don't have any resentments. I said, really? He says, yeah, I just let that stuff go. Nothing bothers me. Well, you could watch this guy walk across a parking lot from 100 yards and know he's pissed about something. You know what I'm talking about, right? Right. But he doesn't think he has a resentment. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. I said, okay, Jerry. I said, in your case, we're going to do something different. I want you to make a list of people you feel smugly superior to. And he got this look on his face like, oh, that's going to be a long list. Because what in resentments, it's impossible to have a resentment without a judgment. And this is where I start to put down the manifestations of self, the ego. That part of me that climbs up on the throne of judgment and starts making the judgments. This is how I play God. So I'm looking at the resentments. And then an interesting thing on page 65, there is... Now, I know people that all they've done is the first three columns. And if that's all you do, you'll get sicker. Because the real work and the magic, the transformation, really comes on the following two pages, 66 and 67. But there is 2 points of value that come from the first three columns. One point of value is that you separate the person from their actions. It's not really the person I hate, it's what happened in column number 2 is what I really hate. The second thing is that I start to realize that there is self-centered fear in every single resentment because something was threatened. Was it my sex relationships were threatened? My self-esteem, my pride, my ambitions, my pocketbook, it's impossible to have a resentment without some sort of fear being involved. Okay? And then on page 66, this is the page in 67 that changed my life. So dramatically that I tell you, I didn't know that at 4 years sober, doing a thorough job on this, I didn't understand that I was building a weapon that I would use against self when it became militant again and rose up in my life at 11 years sober when I found out my wife had been sleeping with my best friend, one of my sponsees, for the whole last year of my marriage. And I, in one sweep, lost my daughter, my best friend, and my wife in one sweep. And my ego had been set waiting, almost like the military-industrial complex, waiting for, making weapons, waiting for an opportunity to go to war. And my ego had been waiting all this time. And if I hadn't done this work, I would have died at that point. I would have died. I didn't know that I was building a weapon that would protect me from really the only problem I've ever had, which is me. It would defend me against me. And one of the things that Scott commented on this is such these resentments, these judgments shut us off from the sunlight of the Spirit. You can't play God and serve God at the same time. They're mutually exclusive positions. So when I'm judging God's kids and playing God, there's no God in my life because I have taken His. I'm it. I'm the great I am, right? And so I'm shut off from the sunlight of the Spirit. And alcoholics, this spiritual malady is that I get a sick, disconnected, isolated, depressed spirit that eventually thirsts for relief. And if I don't find a way to free that and change that, I'm doomed. And this is really where it starts. The line in here that Scott commented on, it says we're prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. Well, what does that mean? Okay, so far how have I been looking at it? What's the first three columns? Isn't it, in essence, I'm taking the stance of a prosecuting attorney? This is my case that I've built against these people. Here, the name, what they did, and what was hurt, threatened, affected, interfered with, or injured, that's my case. So if I was going to look at it from an entirely different angle, wouldn't it mean that I would cross the courtroom and I would sit on the defense table and now I would start talking about it and explaining it and looking at it from their point of view? Now, if you start to do that, I'll tell you one thing. It's going to look different. It's going to look different. Now, the ego doesn't want to do that because the minute you start to cross that courtroom, the ego balks because the ego, all it wants is to be right. Matter of fact, my ego is so strong that it doesn't care if it kills me as long as after I'm dead, everyone knows I was right. But this being prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle is a supposition. And the supposition is that by this time I am surrendered enough. I'm convinced enough of my absolute need to do this that I'm willing to entertain a great thing that possibly I could have been wrong about all these people. Am I prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle? And then it says something I think is it implies it could be this way, but I found it in every case to some degree. It says the wrongdoings of others, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill. Fancied. I discovered that in every single resentment, there's something fancied about it because it is a self-serving judgment. It serves the ego. It serves that part of you that wants to be superior, that part of you that wants to be right. It's self-serving. And I'll tell you it's something that happened to me that really set me up to be able to do this. When I was I was fairly new. And I went out to coffee one night with a guy named Billy Taylor. And Billy was a very active member of AA, went to a lot of meetings. And he was an easy guy to talk to. And he was always like sitting in coffee shops with new guys talking about AA. And I got a lot of my Alcoholics Anonymous in the early days in coffee shops, before and after meetings. And I'm sitting one night, late at night, with Billy, and I found myself, because he was easy to talk to, telling him a few of the things about myself that I was the most ashamed of. And, over the years, I found every alcoholic has those things. It's different in individuals, but we all have those things that we'd like to take to the grave, the things that when we think about, we shudder, that create remorse. And it's different. Maybe for some of you, you went out and partied and got drunk and you forgot about your kids and you left them all alone at home and you shudder to think what could have happened. Or maybe in a drunken rage you beat your kids. Or maybe when you were hungover. Or maybe you had a dog that loved you and one day it came up to lick your face and you hated yourself so much you beat the dog. Or maybe you dimed out a friend in order to save your own butt. Or maybe you let somebody else lose their job because you did something and you let them think that someone else did it. Or maybe you had sex with someone you wouldn't even want anybody to know you'd have lunch with that person. Right? Maybe you had sex outside your species, for God's sakes. I don't know. I don't know what your deal was. I just know you have a deal. Everybody has a deal, right? Everybody has a deal. And I had a bunch of deals, and I told Billy some of my deals, and he took it okay, I suppose. You know what that bothered me? He didn't say, it would have been better if he would have said, oh, me too. He didn't say that. Instead, he said, well, I'm sure you're not the only one that's ever done that. Someday that'll be useful to help someone else. Kind of remember thinking in the back of my mind, it's a little AA party line kind of statement, but he didn't reject me. He seemed to take it well. I went home that night, went to work. That week, my shift got changed. Instead of working 8 to 4, I started working 4 to midnight. Well, for a good part of a year, my whole meeting schedule just went upside down, completely changed. I started going to noon meetings instead of night meetings. And consequently, I didn't see Billy for a long time. A good part of a year later, I go to a meeting at night on my night off that I normally wouldn't go to. And as I walk into the meeting hall, I see Billy across the hall. And I was glad to see him. You know how you get with people that were part of your early sobriety that you hadn't seen in a good time. You know, you see him and it kind of lights you up. It's the bright spot. I saw Billy and I said, "Hey, man, Billy, hi, good to see you." And he wouldn't say hi to me. As a matter of fact, he looked at me with a look of like pained contempt and then just turned away and wouldn't look at me anymore and sat down. And the meeting started, and I'm sitting there, and I don't know what's going on in the meeting, but I'll tell you, inside of me, there's a bunch of stuff going on. And I'm sitting there, and I'm hurt, and I know what's going on. I know that SOB has been judging me for that stuff. And I'll tell you something, there's a part of me that doesn't blame him. God knows I have judged myself harshly enough for that stuff. And I always secretly believed that if you knew about me, what I know about me, you'll feel about me the way I feel about me, and that's not good. And I was sat there and I'm hurt, and when I'm hurt, I'm angry. It's an automatic knee-jerk reaction to me. I start getting angry. I start building my case against him. It's my defense. And I'm sitting there thinking about what a hypocrite he is and all that crap. And he tries to pretend like he's such a good AA member. And then I had this epiphany. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was like it came so clear to me all of a sudden that SOB, the reason he can't look me in the eye, he's been telling people that stuff. And all of a sudden, all the dots connected. There was a gal. I had just asked her out. She would not go out with me, and she's friends with him. I knew he told her that stuff. There was another guy that he runs around with that had been a little distant from me. I knew he had told him. Now I am enraged. I am going to kill him. And feel justified, because if he's doing that to me, he's probably doing it to other new people. And I am cocked and ready, and as soon as the meeting's over, I'm going to tear into this guy. And the chairperson is ending the meeting and says, "Before we close, does anybody have a burning desire?" And Billy raises his hand. He tells everybody in the room that the tumor, they found out the biopsy came back and it was malignant, and he had a very short time to live. And I sat there and I felt about this big, because I awoke to the reality that what I saw in Billy's face had nothing to do with me. I awoke to the reality that on the day he found out he was terminally ill and had a very short time to live, that saying hi to Bob, or even realizing Bob was there, was not even on the horizon. That he probably was so afraid and up in his head as I would be, that he didn't even know I was there. And the look on his face had nothing to do with me. It was all about what was going on with him. And it was like a postcard from God. "Dear Bob, you don't know crap. Love, God." Now, I'll tell you why this was important, and I had a couple other instances like that, is because the book is going to ask me to do something. And if you can't really get how deadly wrong you can be in your judgments, because if I could be that wrong about Billy Taylor, could it be possible? Could it be possible that I could have been that wrong in my perception of my mother and father, and my sister, and my lovers, and my bosses, and my running partners, and the police? Could I have been that wrong, or does my ego refuse to look at it differently? I was finally prepared to look at these things from an entirely different angle. And the book says, it talks about, Scott covered all the death threats on page 66. It tells you pretty much it's going to kill you if you don't get free of this stuff. And then here's the kicker. Here's the thing that after it spends a whole page telling you, oh, stuff's going to kill you. And then it goes, oh, by the way, you can't do anything about it. These resentments must be mastered, but we could not wish them away any more than alcohol. So the knowledge that they're going to kill me and the desire not to have them isn't enough. And some of you know that. You ever have a deep-seated resentment in sobriety? You say, okay, I'm not going to have that again.
No.
It's like, all right, I'm not going to think about that ever again. How do you stop? When I was 2 days after my divorce from my first wife, and I found out that my daughter and my best friend and wife were living together, and I'd go to meetings and I'd be insane, and people would say, I'd talk about it in the meeting, they'd say, hey, just don't think about it. Whoa. I think I would need surgery to do that. You'd have to be cutting out parts of my frontal lobe, man, because I can't stop thinking about that. I couldn't wish it away any more than alcohol, and I knew it was killing me. I knew it. So what did I do? I did what I did earlier in my sobriety in this 4-step. It says this was our course. It's asking me to realize something, and I got to connect really and truly and bring into reality a view of things that's different than anything I've had so far. I have to realize and make something real. And what it's asking me to realize and make real is the fact that the person who wronged me was perhaps spiritually sick. Now, that's not so hard. I get, they're sick and they're idiots too. But here's the kicker. Here's what turned me around. It says, though I did not like their symptoms, column 2, what they did to me. Though I did not like their symptoms and the way their symptoms hurt or disturbed me, that I had to realize that they were like me, perhaps spiritually sick. This is not spiritually sick of a well person feeling sorry and looking down on a sick person. This is a sick person looking at another sick person and getting that guy's driven by the same fears and insecurities and frustrations and misses the mark in life just like I do. And really getting that. And if you get that, all of a sudden, if you really get that, forgiveness is automatic, because by getting that, you're giving to the person the same consideration and slack you would like that person to give you when you really screwed up. And I know there's some people like me in this room that have really screwed up, and people got hurt as a result of it. Yeah. So consequently, I have to, when I forgive, is I give to you the same consideration and other-centeredness that I would want you to give to me if the tables were turned. Right? Can my ego come off of me enough to do that? To realize this. And when I started to do this, and I went through my whole life and did that, my God, how wrong I'd been. And when I started looking at people like this, something happened to me, and I think it's a byproduct of this, is I started to have compassion for them. And compassion is 2 words, com meaning with, and passion, passio meaning pain, is that I started to all of a sudden be able to sit with the pain that drove them to do the things that hurt me. And consequently, when I got it, I realized the price they paid. You know why? Because it would be the same exact price I would pay if I'd done to someone what they'd done to me. And then all of a sudden I could see myself in these people. And the illusion of separation that the ego creates. You know that thing that you know how you pump yourself, I didn't never done that, as if you're superior. All of a sudden, and that ain't holding water, because that's me. That maybe is me with the worst childhood. That maybe is me if I'd been hurt or abused a little more than I had been. It's maybe me if I was really, really afraid with the right amount of emotions and drugs and alcohol in play at the same time. But I start to see through the sickness and see myself and get that if I was in the exact same shoes they were in, I would have had the exact same response and probably done the exact same thing, and then consequently probably would have secretly and covered it up hated myself for doing it, and I started to realize, oh my God, look what they reaped. And I started to see them differently than I ever seen them. About 18 years ago or so, give or take a couple years, I was going through a fifth step with a guy I was sponsoring, and he had buried his worst resentment probably 2/3 or half, into the middle of his fourth step in the resentment list. And we're going through this, and we get to this resentment. It's towards his father. And he came from an awful, hideous alcoholic home. And he grew up in a household where he was beaten physically to the point where he ended up in the hospital on several occasions, and he'd have to tell lies about how he fell out of a tree, or he did, all to cover up all this stuff, and it was horrible. And I'm not talking about one or two instances. I'm talking about a lifetime of horror. And then on a couple occasions, his father's drinking would get so bad that he'd be forced for short periods of time into a state of abstinence. You know how we get beaten down by alcohol and we swear to ourselves we'll never drink. But what happened is Dad would become so irritable when he was sober that it was almost worse, because now he would yell and scream and shut up and get to your room and you're stupid. And this went on and on. It was a nightmare. He could not bring kids home because of the monster. He had to create a whole fantasy life that he would tell the people in school because he didn't want anybody to know. He was so conflicted because even though in the horror of it, there was a part of him that loved his father and was ashamed of the whole thing. And it destroyed. There were a few instances where we suspected his dad may, for a brief period of time, gone to AA or maybe a church or something, because there were two little places he could remember where his dad actually stopped drinking and had a change of heart, briefly, where he'd make the promises, I'm going to get you a bicycle, I'm going to take you to Disneyland, but he'd go back to drinking, and it seemed like the rages and the drunkenness and the beatings would be worse after a period of abstinence. And this is a resentment that owned this guy. This guy had spent 8 years in therapy trying to get free of it and never budged. He had done all the Gestalt stuff, the beating the pillows, the Gestalt chair. He'd done all of that. He had thought it through. He'd done everything. He could not be free of it. It owned him. It affected his relationship with women. It affected his ability to be a team player in any job. He ended up being forced to have little businesses that he'd run for a while, and they'd fail, and he'd get another one because he had a hard time with authority. And here we are. We're in the middle of this fifth step, and he's talking about all this stuff. And I read him a little passage out of the 12 by 12 where Bill expands on the principle, and this was our course. And he says that as we approach true tolerance and see what real love actually means, it'll become more and more evident as we go on that other people like ourselves are frequently wrong and emotionally ill. And we start to see that it's pointless to become angry at people like ourselves who are suffering from the pains of growing up. And then we got to this was our course, and I said to him, you have to realize that somehow inside of you, you're like your father. And he flipped out. He got pissed at me, and he started yelling at me, and he scared me. He started ventilating all this rage, and man, I was afraid he was going to hit me or something, man. I was like, and I'm sitting there, and he's going off, and I'm thinking to myself, well, he's not prepared to look at this from an entirely different angle, I guess. I don't know what to do, I'm stuck here. And he runs out of gas, ventilating all this stuff, and he's glaring at me. And I don't know what to tell him, so I just said, just go on. And he starts reading another resentment, and I can't hear him. Because I said a prayer as I always do, when I listen to a fifth step, I ask God to make me useful. Mm-hmm. And something started happening inside of me. It was like a stone in my shoe, and I couldn't get away from it. Consequently, I can't hear him anymore. And I stopped him. I said, I'm sorry, but I need to go back to another resentment. He said, you want to talk more about my damn father? I said, no. Back at the beginning, that woman that you had the resentment for because she dumped you, yeah, what of it? I said, there were kids in that relationship. You were together for a while, right? He said, yeah, what of it? I said, I just all of a sudden was wondering if in that relationship, if there had ever been a time when you were drunk or stoned on drugs or hungover where you might have ever done anything to hurt those kids. And he put his head down. And I don't know what's going on. And when he lifts his head up, he's got a tear running down just one side of his face. And he says, in this horrible whisper, he said, I'm just like my goddamn father. And I said to him, how did you feel about yourself when you hurt those kids? He said, I couldn't stay drunk enough. I said, do you think your dad might be like that? And he said, my dad's never been able to get sober. He said, there's only one person that ever talks to him anymore. Nobody in the family has anything to do with him. It's his one sister. And his sister will go over. He lives, and he said, my sister told me he lives in this pitiful little trailer out in the middle of California in a little nowhere town in a trailer park. He lives all by himself. He's got pancreatitis and liver damage to the point where his body will not metabolize alcohol. So his body has forced him into a state of abstinence. And his sister said he's the most miserable, depressed, negative, lonely person she's ever known. And I said, do you think you could be like that? And he said, without Alcoholics Anonymous, maybe that would be a vision of my future. And for the first time in his whole life, he could see himself in his father. And he looked at his dad from an entirely different angle. And we started going through the last part of this in the middle of page 67 is where we start stepping up. And the first thing it says, and it says it twice in the same paragraph because it's so important, it says, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. We're not looking for our part. Matter of fact, if you're saying that, you're doing the people you sponsor a disservice when you say we're going to look for our part. And I'll tell you why. There's an unconscious implication. First of all, it doesn't say that in the book. That's a good reason right there. But I'll tell you the baggage that comes with looking for your part. There's an unconscious implication that if I'm going to look for my part, there's another part. And whose part do you think would be bigger? All right. The book says we're not looking for parts. It says disregard the other person involved entirely. Putting out of our minds the wrongs others have done. In other words, I can't hide my own selfish behavior in the shadow of what they did that was sick and wrong. And I think most alcoholics were masters of that. Matter of fact, I think it's one of the reasons I've been so judgmental in my life. I want to get stuff on you so I can. If I worked for you and you're my boss and I caught you taking some product home, that was a license to steal. Right? I looked for what was wrong with you to justify myself. Now the book's asking me not to do that anymore. I have to stand up and be a man. I can't use what you did as an excuse for anything I've been or done. And so he started looking at what kind of a son he had. What if he looked at it in the light of forgetting his father was sick and did all that weird stuff in the beating? What if he had the perfect father? What if he just had to look at what kind of son he was, period? And what he realized, he was a terrible son. He used his father's sickness as an excuse to borrow thousands and thousands of dollars off his dad, never paid a dime back because he's an asshole and I don't have to. He used that as an excuse to pump himself up and look like he was so great to all the rest of the family. He turned everybody in the family against his father except for the one sister who kept going over there. And he thought, oh my God, what have I done to a sick man like that? And he went to make amends because one of the last things it says here, it says, we placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. He's going to the trailer park and he calls me from outside the park and he's scared. And he says, I'm just afraid of the monster. He hadn't seen his dad in years and years. I said, we talked a little bit. And I said, call me as soon as you're done. And he called me later, and he said, what? I said, what happened? He says, I went to the door, and I knocked on the door. I was shaking inside. And the monster didn't answer the door. It was this little old man who was depressed and alone and hopeless and scared. And he saw a look in his father's eyes of guilt and remorse and shame and depression. And he looked in his father's eyes and he saw himself. And he made amends to his father, and he made the decision that he was going to be the absolute best son this planet has ever seen. And he went over and started taking care of his dad. Took care of his dad until his dad died. And he'd tell you to this day, many years later, that the greatest thing Alcoholics Anonymous had given him next to his sobriety is he got his daddy back. One of the things that happens when you push the ego aside, the therapists will tell you, well, you can't change your childhood. I'll tell you something. Since I've been sober and done this work, I got a different childhood than I had. The one I thought I had was not real. It was a selfish, self-centered, overly self-obsessed perception of a childhood that had imperfections in it, as everything in life does. I tried to blame my parents for everything because I didn't want to stand up. And I got my parents back too as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a childhood. The longer I'm sober, the better my childhood looks. Square business. I had parents that weren't perfect, but there's never been a doubt that in their own inhibited, limited way, they loved me with everything they had. With everything they had.
Let me do a couple little pieces and we'll break.
Okay, good.
Bottom of 66. One of the most powerful observations in the book, if not the most important observation, certainly one of them. We saw that these resentments must be mastered. Do you see that? Do you see that? We killed you 7 times on this page. Was that sufficient? I'm a salesman by trade. That's what Bill Wilson was. He was a peddler. And a good peddler will never mention price until he's established value. We've just killed you 7 times. All right? And the reason is because the value is very, very high. We have to establish that because the price is even higher. And then it says, we couldn't wish them away. I can't forgive you. I think the English language has the word wrong. It's not an active verb. It's a passive. And we're going to talk about that in this next section. It says, we realize that people who wrong us are perhaps spiritually sick. My mentor said he defined spiritually sick as cut off from God. I have something the angels don't have, the ability to turn my back on God and go right back to doing it my way. And that's what I was doing. I'm not going to call on anybody. Bring to mind, if you would, for a second, the 1 or 2 worst things you ever did. Got them? Weren't you spiritually sick when you did that? Had you been walking in the sunlight of the Spirit, in conscious contact with this laughing, loving, generous God? Could you have done that? Would you have thought of doing it? Probably not. You were spiritually sick when you did that. And so this is for a gift from another one of my teachers. Watch my hands if you would. I have to realize that the people who wronged me were perhaps spiritually sick. I can know something, but when I realize it, it becomes real for me. And I also learn to see it with my real eyes. Not these that you can see, but the spirit eyes. So I must realize that these people, and what I do with someone at this point is I have them pray the list once. I want you to sit for 5 minutes and talk to God about the worst things you have ever done and how you crave His forgiveness. And then first name on the list, Fred. God help me realize that Fred was not an SOB. He was just sick when he did those things to me. Second name on the list, Mary. Father, please help me see that Mary's not an evil human being. She was just spiritually sick when she did those things. And I think that 5-minute setup talking about the worst things I ever did puts my spirit in perfect position to pray that list once. I'd like to close as we closed last night, and we'll break for lunch. If those who weren't here, if you'll remain seated, we're going to have a moment of silence in honor of those who carried this message to us that are gone. We're going to, at a fairly slow pace, by your standards anyway, we're going to whisper the Lord's Prayer. And the word amen is the last word. Please don't chant anything. We're going to have a moment of silence after that. and see if we can feel what's in this room. Let's have a couple of moments of silence in honor of those that carried this message to us that are gone. Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. God bless us all. We'll see you in a couple hours. My name's Scott Lee, and I am an alcoholic. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming back. We love you dearly. Let's open with a few moments of silence, if you would. I always like to invite God to the meeting. Amen. Thank you. Continuing on step 4, we're at the top of page, actually at the bottom of page 67, we realized the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. This is the beginning of the forgiveness process, which is contained in step 4, which you probably won't find if all you do is write. And it says, though we did not like their symptoms, the way these disturbed us, they like ourselves were sick too. And then here is the first of several prayers in step 4. We ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. I have very prayerfully approached this. Most of my teachers got sober on the second edition. But I refer to the back of the book as the God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. And on page 552, there's an interesting prayer that I find useful, and I think it's in that category. We're going to start at the bottom of 551. Lady's talking about a resentment against her mother, and she says, one morning, however, I realized I had to get rid of it. That's a resentment against her mother. For my reprieve, if you look up reprieve, it's a stay of execution. This is another death threat. We try to keep them coming. My reprieve was running out. If I didn't get rid of it, I was going to get drunk, and I didn't want to get drunk anymore. My prayers that morning, I asked God to point out to me some way to be free of this resentment. During the day, a friend of mine brought me some magazines to take to a hospital group I was interested in. I looked through them. A banner across one featured an article by a prominent clergyman in which I caught the word resentment. Before I go on, I want to observe the sequence of events because I believe that this is a predictable sequence of events. I see something about me that needs work. Not something that's wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with us. We're God's kids. There are things that need work. I pray about it. I like to add in that I talked to a spiritual advisor of some kind. And then what she did was she got focused helping somebody else. I don't know what kind of a hospital group this was, but she's out of herself going to help somebody else, and her answer falls out of the sky on her. That is a predictable sequence of events. And I love it when I see it in somebody I sponsor. I always point and said, hey, it happened again, right? You prayed about it. You talked to me. You took a meeting into the jail. When you came out, your answer was laying on the hood of your car. It happens over and over and over again. Continuing, he said in effect, if you have a resentment you want to be free of, that's an interesting question. Do you want to be free? Did we make our sale? We killed you 7 times. Are you willing to pay the price? Because it's high. If you will pray for the person or thing you resent, you'll be free. If you'll ask in prayer for everything you want to be for yourself to be given to them, you'll be free. For their happiness, their health, their prosperity, and you will be free even when you don't really want it for them, and your prayers are only words and you don't mean it. Go ahead and do it anyway. It goes on to say that'll work in 2 weeks. You're starting out with 409 resentments. Probably 2 weeks is a little bit on the optimistic side. I think the shortest resentment list I ever saw I thought was complete was around 40. It was a young man, and he just wasn't very mad. The longest one I ever saw was over 600, and it was incomplete. This guy hated everybody, and he wished there was more of them. I'd never seen anybody in love with hate like this guy was. So what I like to do with this is I like to add those two together. And as I observe that, this prayer in 67 asks God to help me show them tolerance, pity, and patience like I would grant a sick friend. And then on the other prayer, I'm praying for them. So it would look something like this. The guy is continuing with 30-minute sessions, beginning in the first 5 minutes, talking about the worst things he's ever done. He spends the next 25 minutes in prayer. In addition, I want you to pray in the shower, drive in the car, whenever you think about him, day or night. Let's stay in prayer over this thing. And so the prayer might go something like this. First name on the list, Fred. God, help me show Fred the same tolerance, pity, and patience I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. And also pray that Fred's hair doesn't fall out, and that he gets promoted at work, that his kids go to school on scholarship, that his wife is fabulous in bed, that his lawn grows lush and green, but it grows so slowly he only has to mow it once a year. Okay, hang it right out over the edge. I don't think you can be too creative on this one. And then afterward, I say you ask yourself a simple question. Do I mean that? That's not an essay question. That's a yes or no. You either mean that or you don't. If you don't mean it, go to the next name. Don't stay there. If you do mean it, put a check mark in the margin and go to the next name. And when we get to the end of the list, we'll start again with the ones that aren't checked. And we're going to do this until you're finished, and I really couldn't care any less how long it takes. I'm working with a guy right now that's got about 10 years, who's never done the book. And he's down to 3, having started with a couple of around 300 about 5 months ago. I don't care how long this takes. I don't know of anything more important that we do. There's a prayer that we pray at the end of a lot of meetings in my part of the world, actually all over the country, that has a phrase in it. And the phrase is, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive. And I believe what that says is, if I don't forgive them, don't you forgive me. My sponsor said, what you really want is mercy for you and justice for everybody else. And the package is mercy for everybody or justice for everybody. And you are part of everybody, and you get to choose. I'm not in a position to face justice. So I've chosen mercy for everybody. And to me, this approach, as I said earlier, and I believe the English language has it wrong. Sure does in my case. Forgive isn't something I do, it's something I receive. I get here locked up like this, and what you've taught me to do is to open to receive the gifts that have always been here. It's never been God's unwillingness to give. It's been my inability to receive that's been the problem. And I think of resentment as ice around my heart. And what I do with these two prayers combined is I hold the icy heart up to the sunlight of the Spirit. And the ice has a thickness, I think, based on the severity of the events, how long ago they were, how much I've nurtured them. And the sunlight will always melt ice. And maybe the time period has to do with how close I can hold it and how long. I don't know the answers to any of those questions. I know this. This works. There's a wonderful workshop a man that I sponsor does on going through the forgiveness process for the man that killed his son. This is some powerful stuff, all right? Don't discount this. So forgive isn't something I do. It's something I receive. And what this process did for me was it opened me up to receive the gift of not hating you anymore. You come to me and tell me you want to be close friends with me and us to be really close, but by the way, you hate my children. That's not going to work, is it? Now I'm going to God and saying I want to be close to you, but meanwhile I'm going to hate some of your children. That package doesn't make any sense to me. And so this, for me, is the forgiveness process. And I say, if we do something more important than this, I don't know what it is. This is beyond, this is just somewhat more important than life or death. That's my experience with it. And my experience is that it works. And it works every time. It takes some time. This particular guy, and I have his permission to talk to you, this particular guy prayed his list 2.5 times before he checked off the first name. That's not unusual. I don't care. I've been nurturing these things for a long time. We're digging the poison out of your soul. That's not poetry. That's an exact description of what we do here. And this is where it happens, between the third and fourth columns of the resentment inventory. And then, continuing at the top of 67, gives me my marching orders from now on. When a person offended, we say to ourselves, this is a sick man, how can I be helpful to him? Here's another prayer. God save me from being angry, thy will be done. That's what I do when you bug me now. And then it says we avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. Interesting, page 77 at the top. For those of you who read the big book regularly, you'll laugh when I say you have to read it all the time to catch all the new stuff. Because, they sneak into your bedroom at night, they changed it, they add some stuff. They added this about 2.5 years ago, for those of you who may have missed it. Now, those of you who are new, they don't rewrite the big book, but we read it with new eyes. And third line, 77, our real purpose to fit ourselves to be a maximum service to God and the people about us. And I understood for the longest time that I was supposed to be a maximum service to God and the people about me. And that's not what it says at all. It's to fit myself. It's for me to do the work on me as best I can, to go through this forgiveness process, to be available, to stay as cleaned out as I can, so I can be the best tool. His job to use me. My job is to keep the tool sharp. Continuing on 67. Here's another powerful promise. We cannot be helpful to all people. At least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. Is that a promise? My goodness, that's all these people we hated. And Bob covered it so beautifully, referring to our list and putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done. I can't do that if I still hate them, by the way. How am I going to do that if I still hate them? I don't think it's possible to think about somebody I still hate and put out of my mind what they did. So it's important for me to go through this forgiveness process first and get that piece of poison dug out of my soul. We resolutely look for our own mistakes, not our part. That's a terrible thing. Not looking for my part at all. I'm looking for my mistakes. Because if I've gone through this forgiveness process, nobody else has a part. All we have left is my mistake. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Those are the earmarks of the emergence of self. Selfish, I want it my way. Dishonest, I don't care if I have to lie to get it my way. Self-seeking, very similar to selfish. Frightened, I'm afraid I may not get my way. It's the reemergence of self. And that list is all over this book. And I'm going to hit just a couple of the places. Page 84, about 10 or 12 lines from the bottom in the 10th step inventory, and we'll touch on this a little bit later. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. That sounds familiar. Top of 86, when we retire at night, constructively review our day, were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? There's a similar list. Here's one at the top of page 88. We are then in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions. A somewhat different list, but very similar. Page 145. Am I going fast enough? Page 145. Where's that lady that did that? Yes, thank you. We have enemies. They're described very clearly on page 145. Paragraph begins in the middle of the page. The greatest enemies of us alcoholics are resentment, jealousy, envy, frustration, and fear. Not the exact same list, but very, very close. And those are all the earmarks of the reemergence of self. It always comes back to self. Continuing on 67, it tells us twice to disregard what they say, and then I look for my mistakes. And I love this thing on the last sentence. We admitted our wrongs honestly and we're willing to set these matters straight. Gee, that sounds like step 8, doesn't it? Yeah, very much so. And then I'm going to leave some of this for Bob, but we indict fear in the next paragraph. Generally speaking, it's not a good thing. And on page 68, it says we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. What that tells me is that I have some fears that have resentment connected, and then I have some that don't. I kind of got two categories. I can find some of them by reviewing the resentment inventory. Others I may need some help with. And I have what I have them do in the spiral notebook is turn 5 or 6 pages, make a big dog ear so you can find it, so you can add the other resentments as you find them. And then let's have a list of fears. Now, I've got some very close friends who come up with a 4-column inventory out of this part of it. You know what? I missed something on the page before, didn't I? Y'all excuse me. Let's go back to 67. This paragraph begins with referring to our list again, putting our mind, we look for our own, I'm looking for my mistakes. I like to use that for a 4th column. And there's not much room over there. You got a half a page, 2 lines, all you got left. So this is not a big, long written, beat me up kind of thing. I'm just looking for my mistakes. So let's put them down. What did I do wrong? Next to girl left me for another guy. Well, I was seeing some other girls myself and got caught. Maybe that's partially my fault. The professor that gave me the bad grades. Well, I didn't study and I didn't show up for class that much. He didn't actually give me the grade. I earned it. High school football coach didn't play me as much as I said I deserved. Well, I go back and look at it. When I went to practice, I didn't practice very hard. In addition to which, there were other guys at that position that played better than I did. I got to go back and look at the truth on these things. I don't have to like it. I do have to look at it. So for me, that's the fourth column. I'm glad we picked that back up. Continuing here on page 68. Even though we had no resentment connection, we asked ourselves why we had them. I'm so grateful they tell me. I had no idea why I had fears. No idea. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? And what I asked them to do is to go down your fear list and ask yourself a question, one at a time. If I were totally God-reliant, would I have this fear? It's a good question. And I think that will show you that it is self-reliance that generates the fears. Next paragraph, perhaps there is a better way. We think so. We're now on a different basis. Basis of trusting and relying upon God that seemed redundant to me. Roman numeral 16, forward to the second edition. One of the most powerful concepts I found in this book, and it just screamed at me one day. For those of you who brought your book, we're pretty close to the front, and it's in second or third edition XBI. Bill Wilson's about to leave the Oxford groups, and he's not taking everything they got, but he's taking some of it. About 10 lines from the top. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution of those harmed, which might be different from an apology, helpfulness to others. Now listen to this last phrase, and the necessity. I wonder if that's important. The necessity of belief in and dependence upon God. And the thing that strikes me on that is it's possible to believe in God and not have a higher power. And that dependence for me is the difference. Belief in God and dependence upon God are separate concepts. And that's what we're talking about here. Back on 68. Basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We're in the world to play the role He assigns. Step 1, section B, my life's unmanageable. I'm here to play the role God assigns. And I love the analogy that God created a particular animal and He gave that animal a taste only for the leaves that grow at the top of a particular kind of tree. And He also gave the giraffe a long neck so he could get to them. I have a long neck for God's will for me. I am designed for it. But I had to get the poison out. I had to get the self out of the way first so that could happen. Just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. Just as I do as I think He would have me. I don't always know. Don't always know what God wants me to do. But if I'm trying to do what I think He wants me to do next, I still make mistakes, but I make a finer quality mistake than I've ever made before in my life. And that is, in fact, what progress is. All of my life, they've been telling me we learn from our mistakes. Not so. If we learn from our mistakes, how did Alcoholics Anonymous possibly form? I don't learn from my mistakes, never did. What I learned from is living with the results of my mistakes. We got 5 steps out of 12 that address that. 4, 5, 8, 9, and 10 are all about me embracing the results of my mistakes, and that's where the learning occurs. I'm like the dog that wets on the rug. What did he learn? Absolutely nothing. When did he start learning? When you rubbed his nose in it. Me and the dog have that in common. We like to have our noses rubbed in it because that's where I learn. And as I insist upon living with the results of my mistakes, I was told that's what freedom is. Freedom isn't getting away with it. Freedom is when I gleefully embrace the results of all of my own decisions and actions. I'm free to do anything I'm prepared to live with the results of. That's what freedom is. And that's what this is about, is me taking responsibility for my own actions. That's what this is about. That's how I get free. And the next time I'm in a similar situation and I'm about to do something that's going to get me in trouble, do I think, oh, that's a mistake? No, that's not what I think. I think, did you enjoy making amends last time you did something like this? I hate amends worse than communism. I got no interest in doing amends. I don't like amends at all. So I think I'll just keep my mouth shut this time and then I won't have to do amends. And that's where the learning occurs for me. I've discovered something for me, and that's I have discovered the source of all anger for me. Anger for me comes from being right. I have never been angry when I wasn't also right. I have been right when I wasn't angry, but I hadn't been angry when I wasn't right. If I'm angry with you in traffic, I'm right. You shouldn't be driving that way. And wherever it occurs, when I'm angry, it's because I'm right. And my being right is based on my judgment. And it comes back to me getting out of the judgment business. When I get out of the judgment business, I don't get mad. I think everybody has a good motive. Somebody asked Al Capone one time why he was involved in drugs and prostitution and gambling and illegal alcohol, all those things. He said, I was just trying to get people the things they wanted. Al Capone had a good motive. Okay? That's why guys like me got to get out of the motive business, because I'm fully capable of that. That's why I got to stay involved in principle. But when I grant that you have a good motive, right, if you're all the way on one side politically, if you will grant that the people on the other side have good motive, you don't have to be angry with them anymore. It gave me a tremendous freedom. I disagree with the principles, but I'm not angry with them anymore. What a gift. What a gift, because I'm free. I got free. This sentence is permission to make a mistake. Just the extent we do as we think he would have us. I don't always know. It's okay that I make mistakes. That's my job. It's my assignment. In my own particular religious beliefs, the job of being perfect is already taken. Somebody's got that. There's not like an address where I can mail a resume, get interviewed, now I can be perfect. If it's not my job to be perfect, is it not logically my job to make mistakes? And I'm good at it. Right? And the learning process occurs for me as I live with the results of those mistakes. Because I believe the mistakes and the lessons are paired. If I had the lesson, I wouldn't have made the mistake. The reason I made the mistake is it points me at a lesson. And when I get that lesson, I don't always get it the first time, but when I get that lesson, my next assignment is to make the next mistake. It should be a better one than the last one. My mistakes are getting better and better. I got my buddy Chainsaw Mike. Y'all get one of his CDs. Chainsaw Mike says, I got Cadillac problems. That's right. That the better mistakes I make today, the better problems I have tomorrow. Because that's where they all come from. So here's permission to make a mistake. At the Allenine side of that is if I got a string on you holding you in line and you jump out, you pull me with you. When I can let go of that string and it becomes okay with me that you make mistakes, that's the other half of the freedom. That's my experience with it. Continuing on 68, that's not very often, we never apologize to anyone for depending on our Creator. It tells me that twice, and that men of faith has courage. I'm kind of skipping down a little bit. It says they trust their God. We never apologize for God. We let him demonstrate through us what he can do. We ask him, this looks like a prayer to me. 4 steps, a series of lists, observations, and prayers. The list, writing the list, I don't know that has any effect at all. The observations, a few of which are written, most are not. And the prayers are life-changing. We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us do. And boy, is that ever not what that says. What he would have us be. Yeah, be, not do. And I wonder, well, what would he have me be? Well, I found the answer. It's in the book, 133. Third line. We are sure God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. And I think anything that I can add to that list that fits is within the Master's will for me. Happy, joyous, free, and trying to be a good father. Yep. Happy, joyous, free, and letting people in traffic. Yeah, I think so. Happy, joyous, free, and attending a lot of AA meetings. Yeah. Happy, joyous, free, and cheating on my taxes. Ouch. Try it. My mentor, Don, used to say if he was unsure whether or not to do something, he'd pray this prayer. God, if I go to do this, will you go with me? Boy, don't pray that if you don't want the answer. You will get it. And then it says that once we commence to outgrow fear. It seems to me that if it's possible for me to outgrow fear, fear must be a lack of growth. I'm going to guess spiritual growth. I'll tell a fear story. A lady friend of mine in Nashville, been in recovery a long time, was standing in line in a bank to cash a check. And all of a sudden, there was a hairy arm around her throat and a pistol in her ear. And she's a hostage in a bank robbery. She talked about it later, and she said all of her fears were in the future. That as she stood there moment by moment, she was not free to go about her business. She was physically a bit uncomfortable. But her fear was that he would abduct her or that he would shoot her. But if she could have stayed in the moment by moment, she was really okay. Crystallized it for me. Anytime I'm in fear, I'm in the future. Anytime. And so what's the answer to that? The answer to that isn't to don't be afraid. For me, the answer to that is to get into today. I learned this from Bob a couple of years ago. We were doing one of these. And how it works, there's this marvelous phrase. There's one who has all power. May you find him now. Bob said, now isn't when I find God, it's where. I have to be here where he is. So how do I do that? This is an assignment I give to guys that I sponsor that are having trouble with that. I have them take big sheets of paper with a big magic marker, write the word today. One on top of the socks in the sock drawer, one on the underwear, one on the mirror where you shave, one on the dashboard of your car. You got a screensaver at work. I want today bouncing around in there. Let's cut two the size of dollar bills, one on the inside, one on the outside. They say today. And I want you to use that word as much as you can, not only in your speech, but also in your prayers and especially in your thoughts. See, my disease isn't very creative. It keeps hitting me with the same old junk. And when it hits me with one of those, they're always the what ifs, chasing the permutations in the future. When it hits me with one of those, if I tag the word today onto the end of the question, it takes all the power away. Right? It's not what am I going to do if rat-tat-tat-tat-tat. It's what am I going to do if today. If I can get the today word into that, it takes all the power away. And it helps me stay here, which is where I need to be. Fear is an evil and corroding thread. The other thing I wanted to talk about is acceptance. It was explained to me that I did not have to approve of something to accept it. Acceptance does not, it can, but it doesn't have to include approval. If anybody here was abused as a child, I want to tell you right now that I do not approve of that. I think that's a terrible thing, and I'm sorry that you had to go through that, and it wasn't right, and it's not ever going to be right. No child deserves that. You didn't deserve it. It's not right. It's just not right. But I've learned to accept that happened to me. What acceptance means is that on a heart level, I have quit fighting something over which I have no power. That doesn't mean I'm inviting evil in. It doesn't mean if somebody's bashing me, I don't have to defend myself in some way. It means that I need to quit fighting those things over which I have no power. That's what acceptance is. It's when I let go of those things and just be at peace. There was I read a book a number of years ago, and I'm sorry I can't call. I think it was entitled King Baby. And it was written by this guy was a PhD psychologist, psychiatrist, one or the other, and he was also an ordained minister in one of the mainline Protestant faiths, Presbyterian, Methodist, somewhere along in there. And he was the chaplain of an insane asylum. And he got a wild hair one day. I'm not sure that's exactly how the book presented it, but and he inventoried the patients and asked them one question: would you rather be right or would you rather be free? And the inmates of the insane asylum overwhelmingly said they would rather be right. And back when I was nuts, I would have rather been right also. And today I would rather be free. And I'm convinced in my case that those are exact and perfect opposites. Right and free are opposites. Because when I have to be right, I can't make mistakes. If I make a mistake, I have to beat me up. And it gets ugly. And beating me up is never the next right thing, ever. No matter what, because there's always a lesson there. Today I've chosen free. I get out of the business of being right, and what I get is a sense of peace. I get to just kind of be okay with me. See, my priority isn't what I say it is. My priority is what I do. If I want to know what my priorities are, I don't listen to my words about the future. I look at my actions in the recent past. What was accomplished was a priority. What was not accomplished was not a priority. And anything that I say to the contrary is a lie that I'm telling me. I hated that when I heard that 5 years sober at the Mustard Seed in Chicago. Hated it. Because I was saying a bunch of things were priorities and I wasn't doing anything about them. Priority is about what I do. So if I want to know where I am, what my priorities are, I look at my actions over the last few days. I've got 3 things I call my spiritual barometers. At 2 years sober, I was working on my character defects. That's a good way to get a brain hernia. And anyway, working on my character defects is driving me crazy. And I located 3 I couldn't do anything with. And they were lying. Well, not actually lying, improving the truth, actually. Just around the edges to make it prettier. Lying, swearing, and my attitude toward those of you who got your driver's licenses out of Cracker Jacks boxes. And what I discovered eventually was that if one of those got out, if I'd looked, they were all out. See, and I can't stop them. I can't stop me from swearing, right? I guess duct tape. Can't stop me from lying. I can't change my attitude towards you. But I believe this. When my spiritual house is in order, those things aren't a problem. So when I hear me angry and cussing at you in traffic, I don't work on that. What I do is I inventory my spiritual program over the last few days. How long has it been since I talked to my sponsor? How long has it been since I talked to my sponsees? When's the last time you took a meeting into a jail or a treatment center? The one that gets out of me is what's your morning prayer and meditation look like? Do you still hold that commitment? What's your evening prayer? Are you reading your spiritual? Where's the hole in your spiritual bucket? Something's leaking. And I go back and plug that hole, and 2 days later you can cut me off in traffic and almost hit me. And I'll smile at you from the depths of my soul, and I'll wave my entire hand at you. I'll wave the whole thing. And they don't do that around here. And I'll say, God, go with that one, you know. And thank you that I saw he was going to cut me off and get on my brake. And I wasn't in a wreck that it would have been his fault, but I'm still in a wreck. Thank you so much. And God bless that child. I make mistakes like that too. And I hope the next guy that I do that to can forgive me like I do this guy. God bless him. I can't change me from the screaming maniac. I can't change me. But when I go back and plug the holes in my spiritual bucket, those things just don't happen.
Thanks, Scott. I'm Bob, an alcoholic.
Hey, Bob.
Heard a guy years ago say there's only two driving forces in human nature, fear and love. And as I go through this inventory, I start to see how much a part of my life fear was. When I saw it, fear was involved in every resentment. And when we get to the sex inventory, we'll see that it's involved deeply in that. I started to realize what it means when it says we're driven by 100 forms of fear. And yet, when I remember sitting down at the kitchen table with a legal pad, and I'm going to do my first out-of-the-book legitimate inventory, and I'm trying to write, I just finished my resentments, and I'm trying to write fears, and I'm sitting there and I'm drawing a blank. I can't think of anything I'm afraid of. And I went to a meeting, the end of a monthly speaker meeting. We had a speaker there from out of town, and a bunch of us went out to eat after the meeting, get pie shop, and sitting in this restaurant. I'm talking to this old timer, and I said, you know, I'm doing an inventory, and I got to the fear inventory, and I realized I don't have any fears. And he said, really? I said, yeah, I don't have any fears. He said, can I ask you some questions? I said, yeah, sure. He said, are you afraid of large, angry, barking dogs? Well, everybody is. And he says, we're not talking about everybody. We're talking about you. And I said, well, yeah. He says, good, you can put that down. Are you afraid of rattlesnakes? Well, I mean, everybody's afraid of rattlesnakes, for God's sake. He says, but we're talking about you. He says, black widow spiders. And I'm nodding my head. Then he starts getting a little personal. He says, are you afraid of being embarrassed? Are you afraid of what other people think of you? Are you afraid that no one will ever love you? Are you afraid of dying old alone? Are you afraid of getting sick and you can't take care of yourself? Are you afraid that people are going to find out stuff about you that you don't want anybody to know about? Are you afraid that you'll never have a good life because you've hurt so many people that you know it's going to catch up with you? Are you afraid to really trust God because you've hurt so many of his kids? Are you afraid of cancer? God, when he said that one, I had cancer every other week in my early I don't know how many thousands of deathbed speeches I've rehearsed in my head when I find out it wasn't a brain tumor, it was a headache. Oh, all right. And all the people, are you afraid of, what about all the people you hurt? Are you afraid that's going to catch up with you? And on and on and on. And then he finally, after hammering me with this, he finally says, so was there anything you weren't afraid of? And I thought, my God, how did that happen? The book says it's an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of my existence was shot through with it. I can't see fear because I'm like a fish looking for water. It is the motivating aspect of self that dominates me and drives my life. And I can't see it because it is me. It has consumed me. It's funny how when Silkworth in the doctor's opinion says something that has come through my whole life. He says, to us, our alcoholic life seems the only normal one. You take the alcohol away, and I start thinking it's normal to wake up afraid. Normal to wake up anxious and apprehensive about life. Normal to worry and spin in my head about stuff all the time. As if normal equals neurotic, right? But to me, my alcoholic life seems the only normal one. And I found out that I was so full of fear. And then the next line is an interesting statement. It says that it's talking about fears, and it says it sets in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve, but did not we ourselves set the ball rolling. What does that mean? Well, when I was new in sobriety, I heard a guy say, he said, I've never had a problem in my life that has hurt me as much as my solutions to my problems. Psychologists call this self-fulfilling prophecies. And what is it? I get a fear, and then I try to manage the fear. And what happens is I make the fear come true. I'll give you an example. My first sober relationship, I get into it. I have no self-esteem yet. I've not made all my amends. I haven't spent a dozen years sponsoring people and doing service. So I haven't really done anything to change my relationship with me yet, or my relationship with God or you, really. So what am I bringing to the table except a big vacancy? And a lot of feelings of inadequacy and a lot of not enoughness. That's all I got. Don't make me a bad guy. It's just all I got. I haven't done the work consistently and lived differently to be differently. That's all I got. So I come to the table in this relationship with a fear. What's the fear? Well, the fear is that she's going to dump me. Right? So what happens? The fear drives me. It drives me to be the possessive, smothering guy. It drives me to be watching her all the time. It drives me to be the guy who drives by her house in the middle of the night just to make sure nobody else's car's there. It drives me that when she hugs somebody in the meeting, I'm going, hey, I pull the guy aside after the meeting, hey, don't be hugging my girlfriend. People are looking at me like I'm a whack job, man. When she leaves the room, I look through her purse, make sure there's no guy's cards in there. Right? She said to me one time, she says, every time I'm in a meeting with you and I look up, you're looking at me. I don't even know I'm doing it. Right? I don't even know I'm doing it. And what happened? My fear of her leaving me drove me to be the guy who literally would push her out of my life. And I remember the day that it was the day after it was over and she's now off with some other guy and I feel like I've been gut shot. And I wished I was dead and my whole life is crumbling around me because she was, unbeknownst to me, became my higher power, right? And in the middle of that desolation, and it's horrible, there's a little voice that I can hear in my head that I've come to identify with my ego. And the little voice says, see, you were right. I like being right. Devastated, about ready to drink, but right for God's sakes. I've lost jobs like that because I've gone to work and made... And what are my fears? But judgments. The ego says, you don't like me. I can tell by looking at you. So what happens is I don't like you first. Right? And if I don't like you first long enough, you know what happens? You end up not liking me. Right? See, I was right. I was right. I was right. That's why in the next line it says, sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more harm. Nothing will rob you of love, intimacy, abundance, richness in your life more than self-centered fear. You will discount yourself, you will discount life, and you will discount God's grace in your life continually. And as life is presenting you with opportunities for abundance, your fear will tell you, bat it right away. Because your fear tells you no. I sat with an old guy one time, he was dying of natural causes. He was sober a long time, a guy named Rusty. And we're sitting next to his bed, and he was a cool guy. And Rusty said to me, he says, kid, when you get to the home stretch, and you look back over your life, he says, oddly enough, it's not my mistakes I regret as much as the things I was too afraid to try. The people I was afraid to love and let close because I was afraid you wouldn't like me. So I'm not going to like you first. My sponsor, who I've had now for 15 years, my first 10 years of my sobriety, maybe 12 even, I resented him. And do you ever notice when you have a resentment, from the moment you make the judgment about the person having resentment, it changes your perception. Now they can't do anything right. They just can't. You know what I mean? Because you're looking at them like that. They can't do it. And I just got the ego wants the case. You have to be justified. The hate, you got to justify. And what was the bottom line? Why did I build all these cases against him? Because I was afraid he wouldn't like me. I was afraid I wouldn't measure up to his standard in Alcoholics Anonymous. He cuts a high standard. So I discounted him first. I threw him away because I was afraid he would throw me away. Nothing will rob you more than fear. There are things in my life I love today that at one time I discounted and judged harshly because I was afraid. One of the things I love to do, I travel all over the world doing it, is scuba diving. Somebody offered to ask me if I want to go with them and learn how to do that when I was new in sobriety. Oh, I wouldn't like that. I'm just afraid of the learning curve. I'm afraid I'll look stupid. Somebody asked me if I want to go snow skiing when I was a couple years sober. Oh, I don't like that. Snow bunnies, that's the fact. I love snow skiing. I was afraid of looking stupid, right? I'm willing to start at anything right at the top. But I don't. That's why I loved alcohol. Alcohol, you don't have to do nothing. You don't have to go to school to be a doctor. You just have 5 drinks in a bar, you're a brain surgeon. You don't have to do nothing. You just make leaps. Fear is awful, and the book says we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper. So I'm listing all the people I'd harmed that I'm afraid of the retribution or the karma or the people finding out. I'm listing all the people, all my creditors, all the people I owe money for, because later on in the 9th step it says we must lose our fear of creditors no matter how far we have to go, because we're liable to drink if we're afraid to face them. So I list all this stuff down. And then there's a question, I think it's a paramount question, because unbeknownst to me at this point, unless I've read ahead, I'm building also an 8-step list. The book later says you already have it. You made it when you took inventory. So I'm building an 8-step list. And so the question is, we ask ourselves why we had these fears. And I think that's an important question. I'm afraid of Joe from down across town, that other group. Why are you afraid of him? I don't know. I just feel anxious when I'm around him. It makes me uncomfortable. Why do you have the fear? Could it be because you talk crap behind his back when he's not around? And maybe you're afraid somebody might have heard it, and now he might know. I'm afraid of the IRS. Could it be because I cheat on my taxes? I was afraid of smoking cigarettes. Why? Because I might get cancer. Why do I have these fears? I'm afraid of Visa. I'm afraid of all kinds of stuff. And a lot of times in answering that question, I will come upon an unmade amends. Because amends is simply mending things. It's unfinished business between me and God's kids, and between me and life itself. Alcoholism is a state of separation, separate from me and you, separate from me and God. And the mending is the accumulation of a process that reduces the separation and brings me back to a sense of community and oneness. So I make this list. The book I ask the question. The book comes around and answers the question in a general way. It says, wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? And that's always true. That's the bottom line in every case. That's the thing is that of myself, I'm not enough. I can't protect myself from my fears. As a matter of fact, the harder I try, the worse I get. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. Boy, that's really true. I think that people respond to fear one of two ways, usually. Some people respond to fear like a skunk, and when they're afraid, they spray everybody around them. Other people respond to fear like a turtle, and they pull their head into their shell, and they wait until whatever they're afraid of passes. I came here a skunk, and you've gradually turned me into a turtle. A turtle, I'll tell you why a turtle's better. Turtle makes less amends. Skunk is always making amends. Always making amends. And you taught me how to be a turtle by the 10th step in the 12 by 12, when the cultivation of restraint of tongue and pen. That not to react, but learn to act. Take spiritual actions when I'm afraid. Trust God. Talk to my sponsor. Keep my mouth shut. Go to a meeting. Take actions rather than reactions. When it was cocky, it was worse. Perhaps there's a better way. Boy, I hope so. We think so, for we are now on a different basis. What basis is that? Remember step 3. Remember the decision, the formal terms of surrender. We're on a different basis. We're on the basis of trusting and relying upon God. This is our destination. From the moment of decision in step 3, that becomes my destination. Becomes the basis of my life. To trust and rely upon God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. This is more than faith. I was at a retreat 28 years ago, I suppose, and 28 years ago, and I was talking to a guy between the sessions, and it was an old-timer, sober a long time, and I was telling him what was going on with me. And I was telling him how I get up in the morning and I get down on my knees and I turn my will and my life over to the care of God, and I spend the rest of the day worrying about stuff. And it was wearing on me, and I was tired of it. I was tired of that feeling right here of a wind blowing through the pit of my stomach from that anxiety. And he said to me, he said, do you pray, and do you believe in God? Do you have faith? I said, yeah, I know I'm sober now longer than I've been probably my whole life. And God did that. He said, but I don't think you trust God. He said, you have faith. He said, guys like you and I, we can pray fervently and have all the faith in the world and still die of alcoholism. And I've later saw that come true. I saw exactly what he meant as I watched some people with tremendous faith die of alcoholism. He said, what we must have is trust. And he says, I'll tell you the difference. He says, if you went to a circus and you sat in the audience and you watched a tight wire act, and you watched a guy come out to the edge of the wire on the platform pushing a wheelbarrow, you could sit in the audience and have all the faith in the world. He's a professional. This guy can walk across that tight wire pushing that wheelbarrow. You'd say to yourself, I bet she's done it 1,000 times. Absolute faith he can do it. But if you had trust, you'd go up and get in the wheelbarrow. And when he said that to me, I got this sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach because I knew what he was talking about. In other words, I have to stop worrying about Bob and stop defending Bob, protecting Bob, doing for Bob, and really live my life as if I was in the hands of God. I have to get in the wheelbarrow. And the problem with that is I like the concept of getting in the wheelbarrow. I like to go to meetings and read about getting in the wheelbarrow. I like to go out to coffee with people and philosophize about getting in the wheelbarrow. I like to go to discussion meetings and discuss getting in the wheelbarrow. I just ain't getting in the wheelbarrow. You know what I'm saying? Because I secretly believe my fears more than I trust God. Push comes to shove. I believe I trust my fears more than I trust God. Now, it doesn't make me a bad guy. It makes me burdened by a tremendous spiritual handicap. But it doesn't make me a bad guy. So what do you do if you can't get in the wheelbarrow? What do you do if secretly in the pit of your stomach your emotional response is such that if you ever did get in the wheelbarrow, you are absolutely convinced. You get about halfway out that wire, you hear a voice go, "Is that Bob?" And you're just terrified. Like, is that Bob that used to read National Geographic and have those impure thoughts when he was a kid? Is that Bob? You know, and what do you do? Well, page 53 is really what has happened to me in sobriety. And this is what happens to a lot of us, I guess. It says, when we became alcoholics, crushed by self-imposed crisis, I could not postpone or evade. I had to fearlessly face the proposition through a lack of alternatives. I had to fearlessly face the proposition that God is either everything or else he is nothing. He either is or he isn't. What is my choice to be? I have had times in my sobriety where I was crushed by self-imposed crises. I did this. It's coming at me. I can't fix it. I can't maneuver. I can't think my way out of it. And I'm screwed. And there's either a God that they're telling me about that really exists that's got my back, or I am in a lot of trouble. When I was early in sobriety, I was facing 2 years in a state penitentiary. And a guy in AA walked me through. It was the hardest thing I've ever do. I had to turn I'd been sentenced in Pennsylvania. A judge cut me a break, put me in a treatment center for a year for observation and get good UAs, and I had to do all that stuff. And if I could do a year in there, I wouldn't be a felony. And if I didn't, it was a felony and 2 years in prison. It was automatic. I was already committed. He just stayed the commitment. And when I drank again and split there and crossed all those state lines from Pennsylvania to Nevada and came to, and I am sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, this fear is like on me. And this guy in AA told me, you have to turn yourself in. And I thought he was crazy. I said, I'll do 2 years in prison plus probably some tack-on time for splitting. He said, kid, do you want to die of alcoholism? And I said, no. He said, you want to stay sober? Yeah. He said, well, how long are you going to stay sober looking over your shoulder? Every time a cop car goes down the street, your gut just seizes up because you don't know if he's got your picture on his dashboard or not. How long are you going to be able to go like that, kid, before you're going to have to take something or drink something just to survive the feelings of anxiety? And he nailed me because I know what he's saying. I know exactly how I am. I've been down this road before. I drank over again and again over resentments and fear and depression. He said, you got to face this, and he walked me through it. And it was a letter I had to write, followed by a phone call at a certain time that I told him I would call. And in the letter, I had to give him the address of the halfway house I'm living in, which I thought was a really dumb idea. And I remember waiting those 10 days, and I picked up that phone. I called. I was shaking, and this woman answered the phone. She says, he's expecting your call. Put me right through. And he said to me, I talked to my supervisor and we talked to the courts, and you don't have to come back here and do the 2 years, but here's what you got to do. And he gave me a whole list of stuff, and it was all stuff I could do. And consequently, that remained a misdemeanor. It never went back to a felony. I didn't have to do the 2 years, and I'm a free man today. And years later, I got to get a gaming license to run gaming establishments because I faced that. It was the first time in my life I ever got in the wheelbarrow. Why did I get in the wheelbarrow? Because I'm virtuous or because I think it's a good idea? No, I got in the wheelbarrow because I'm telling you, there's nowhere else to go. My whole life came down to God is either everything or he's nothing. Either these people in AA are right, or I might as well just go find that bridge again and try to get up enough courage to kill myself because I am at the end of my rope. Now, I don't know how many times you've got to be at that place where your life comes down to God's either everything or nothing through self-imposed crises, where you're forced into the wheelbarrow until all of a sudden one day the crap's coming at you and you just get in the wheelbarrow. You just get in. As Scott says, volunteer. You just volunteer, you get in. I went 6 years ago, I went through a divorce that there was a lot of money at stake. There was a lot of things that should have had me insane. And I'll tell you something. I stuck with my sponsor through all that. It's not that I didn't have emotionally really hard spots through that, but my actions were the actions of someone who was in the wheelbarrow. I can look back at that time in my life and feel grateful that Alcoholics Anonymous and that I had done this long enough. And by that time, it had been almost a quarter of a century of practice in this crap before I found myself one day getting in the wheelbarrow in a frightening situation, and I didn't have to be kicked in there or driven in there. I just got in the wheelbarrow. Yeah. Now, that took a while. Now, some people, the book says sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. I'm a slow case, right? I sponsor guys that a year or two, they're just hopping in that wheelbarrow just like they have sense or something, But that's not my story. One other thing, and I'm going to turn it back to Scott. In this third paragraph, it refers to something that was confusing to me. It says, we never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We laugh at those who think spirituality is the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. I was speaking in a meeting on, I think it was step 2 years ago. This is quite a while ago. And a woman came up to me after the meeting, and she said something to me that really set me back. And it had me spinning in my head, and it kind of put me off balance. And what she said to me, she came up to me, she said, well, everything you said is fine for you. You have a lot of self-confidence. And I didn't know what to say to her. I walked away. I walked away from that talking to myself, right? And here's what I'm saying to myself. I'm thinking, why would she? I don't have self-confidence. She's after what I know about me. I don't trust me at all. What is she talking? Why would she say that? Self-confidence? No, I don't have self-confidence. And I'm like thinking, what is she? Why did she think that? Why do I look like? I mean, I'm like, self-confidence? No, I don't trust me. And then I realized what she saw. What appeared to be my demeanor was someone who had self-confidence, but it wasn't confidence in self. It was trust in God. And I think at that point, maybe more than even trusting in God, is I trusted you. And I trusted Alcoholics Anonymous. I think I trusted AA in the pit of my stomach, really and truly. I think I trusted my sponsor and the people in my group and the things I heard coming to me from something in meetings first before I could be alone with that thing inside of me and start to trust that. I still sometimes have a struggle with trusting the God instinct inside me, the intuition. It wasn't too many years ago that I was in a situation that God was telling me through the pit of my stomach that I had an employee that I had to get rid of. And my head went crazy. My head said, well, you can't do that. You have no evidence she's doing anything wrong. She's been with you all these years. This would be dumb. How could you ruin her life? You can't just let someone go, for God's sakes. Here's the big one. What would people say? Ego. Feel the ego in that? So I didn't. By the time I finally let her go, I think she'd stolen over $250,000 from me. God was trying to tell me, but the problem is I'm still very inexperienced in this. I've spent more of my life listening to this than I have to this, to the God within me. And I'm sober a long time, and I still think if we were to chart how much of Bob's life he's trusted God and how much of Bob's life he's listened to his own head, I think, unfortunately, my head's still ahead of the curve a little bit, truthfully. So I trust. That's why I have a sponsor. I trust him. I think there's a covenant in Alcoholics Anonymous brought to us by God that when more of us meet for the purpose of recovery, something shows up in the midst. Now, my sponsor, I wouldn't want my sponsor to manage his own life. I think he would be bad. But he does a good job at mine. And it's funny, I do very well. I do very well with the guys I sponsor. I can give them direction. that they couldn't give themselves. And they could give me direction for my life that's better than what I would come up with. The ego, the problem is being sponsorable. You can't let God work through people when you are Him. Scott?
He touched something that's been just a real joy for me. Have you had the experience of somebody you sponsor or someone you're close to asks you a question, and the moment before they asked, you didn't know the answer, and you open your mouth and this beautiful piece of truth falls out that wasn't of you but was through you, and 3 hours later you can't quote it and maybe can't even remember what it was?
I need it.
Yeah. And you got to call them and say, "What was it? I hope you wrote that down." And it's just such a spectacular thing. And I would say, "Wow, did you hear that?" Man, I'm good. I'm really good. I'm not that good. One more quick story. We'll take a break. I moved out of the home my first wife and I were living in when I was sober 6 years. She was tearing me up one more time. She told our daughter a couple of years ago that when I got sober, I changed, and she didn't. I did a lot of things to make her very, very sick. I'm guilty as charged. This is not her inventory, all right? I pray for her. God bless her. I put her through hell. But she's ripping me one more time, and I can't stand it. And I got this moment of clarity that said, she's 5'5" and 105. You're 6 feet 210. You're about to give her a straight right to the face, and when she goes down, you're going with her. She's on the way to the hospital. You are on the way to the jail. It's a bad plan. Worked it out all by myself. And I did about face in mid-screech and went out and got in a car and drove away. Bought a newspaper, want ads. 48 hours later, I moved into an apartment, and I don't know what to do. I don't believe in divorce, and yet I know if I live with her, I'm going to hit her. Because she used to control me with my guilt. And I got here, I'm not guilty anymore. I'm uncontrollable. And that was hard for her. And I was given a gift, and I'm going to share it just in case somebody can use it. It's a set of prayers that worked so beautifully for me. Because I asked for help on that, and this is what I got. And I prayed these 3 prayers each morning. The first prayer is, God, if it's your will for us to be together, put us together. The second one, if it's your will for us to be apart, put us apart. Those are the easy ones. Here's the one that counts. God, if it's your will for me not to know today, leave me not knowing. Yeah. Step 1, section B in prayer form. Guidance will be here right on time. If it's His will for me not to know today, I'm asking not to know. And when I can do that and mean it, I can have my sponsor's definition of serenity. He said, serenity is not freedom from the storm. Serenity is peace in the midst of the storm. And I can only do that if I'm not demanding guidance before He gets here. If I'm willing to walk in His presence and not know. When I can do that, I can be at peace. We're going to take a short one this time, about 12 and a half minutes. Please be back on time. We will. Hit it.
Huh? You want me to start?
You bet. Yeah, do about 15 minutes on this, and then I'll just pick it up and do 15, and we'll do 15 apiece on 5, 6, and 7. See if we can wrap those.
We're just going to get some more bottled water. Do you guys want sodas or anything while we're at?
Diet soda.
What kind?
Good.
Pepsi or Coke?
Diet Pepsi or Coke? And how
I'm
about
good.
you?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Bob Darrell, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Bob.
Well, now we're going to do sex right here in this room. Half of you woke up, the other half wanted to run. Bottom of page 68 starts the section on sex. It says, now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there, but above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off the track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. One set of voices cries that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we do not have enough of it, or that it isn't the right kind. What does that mean? I want pictures. They see its significance everywhere.
You said you'd be good.
I know. One school would allow man no flavor for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. Cayenne pepper diet. We want to stay out of this controversy. This is a controversy that's been going on and cycling through our society for centuries. If you track, if you were to track sexual morals in society over the last several centuries, you'd see it goes from one extreme to another. I mean, if any of you were little kids, or even remember from watching Nick at Night, the sexual morals of the 50s. I mean, TV shows didn't even have bedrooms. I mean, it was like, there was like, whoa, it was, or even the first ones with bedrooms, they had separate beds, right? It was like, and then what happened? Huh?
The first couple shown in bed together on television was the Flintstones.
Right.
That's right.
They had to be a cartoon.
That's right.
And then what followed that? What followed that thing? The 60s, where, my God, it was free love, or at least it was reasonably priced, or so. You know, it was like, it was like where there were orgies and love-ins, and I mean, even the most pathetic of us had a chance in those days. And then society is cycled like that through Elizabethan time. I mean, it's cycled like that from one extreme to the other. And why would the pendulum go like that? Because neither extreme really works. People get hurt in both ends. The book goes on to say we're not to be the arbiter. We must not be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We're not going to. This isn't about sex. We don't even have an opinion of where you are in the spectrum of sexuality. It doesn't matter. The inventory we're about to engage in is not about sex. It's about exactly what it said it was about in the beginning. We're looking for the manifestations of self which had defeated us. It's about selfishness. It's about inconsideration. It's about manipulation through arousing jealousy, suspicion, bitterness. It's about dishonesty. It's about all of that. We don't want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct, and that's good news to some of us. Most of us, I think, I've talked to a lot of people over the years. I've heard a lot of fifth steps. And I'll tell you something that I think is amazing. And no matter where you were in the scope of sexuality, as far as frequency, etc., no matter how bizarre you were, whatever, everybody on the spectrum feels bad about themselves. The people who were so locked up sexually that they only had 2 people on their whole sexual inventory and they had to be drunk in both cases felt there was something wrong with them. And the person that had 400 names felt there was something wrong with them too. No matter where you were, we all come in here with a feeling that we're not quite right. A feeling of inadequacy, a feeling of not enoughness. I live in a city with a $1 billion plastic surgery industry that feeds off of people who tell themselves a lie. And the lie is, as is, God made you, you ain't enough. And the more you believe that lie and feed it, the stronger it gets. I know a woman in California, a good gal. She's had 27 plastic surgeries, every one, and she got to the point. At one point, she looked like a model in a magazine. Then she went so far past that she started looking a little odd, actually, almost cartoonish after a while. But it was never enough. It was never ever. She could never look in the mirror and be comfortable with what she saw, no matter how gorgeous she looked. And the problem was not in reality. The problem is in here. Right? So we don't want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We have everything in Alcoholics Anonymous that exists in society, that's existed for every nation on earth, from the beginning of time. We have heterosexuals, we have homosexuals, we have bisexuals. I have a friend who says he's a quattrosexual. I said, "What's that?" He says, "I hadn't done anything with anyone at any time for a quarter." Right. Transex. We have everything in alcohol. Everything that there is, we have in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we're not the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. But we try to be the arbiter of your spirit. There's an old adage about recovery, is that we must become right with ourselves. Whatever you find as you clear away everything that's not you is what you're left with, and you have to be right with that, whatever that may be. Whatever that may be. We all have sex problems. That's really true. I know some guys, I run into guys every once in a while, they're new, and they want to tell me about how oversexed they were. My friend Charlie says it best. He says, "You're not oversexed, you're undersecure." We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? Well, here's what we do. And we're making a list again, just like we did, I believe. I'm a list guy. It says we reviewed our conduct over the years past. So I was instructed, and I tell my guys that I sponsor, you make a list of all interactions where there's sexual energy, even if the sexual act isn't actually consummated, if it has aroused that deal in you. You want to see how self-centeredness manifests itself when those instincts are aroused. And in the 12 by 12, it talks about the three basic instincts, the three S's. The instinct for security, both emotional and material. The instinct for sex, and the instinct for a place in society. In other words, what we think other people think of us. We want to feel comfortable with our place in society. And in the sexual arena, it's the one area where all three of those instincts can be threatened severely. Especially in a long-term relationship. If you're in a long-term relationship, a marriage, especially if it's a community property state, your material security is in danger. Your emotional security is in danger. Your position in society is in danger, because I don't know anybody that wants to go back to their family or home group or church or anywhere where they have the friends and have to tell their friends that I failed again at another one. Right? I don't know anybody. And then your sex is threatened. So because of that, I think that there's more self-centered angst in the sexual arena than any other arena. That's why it makes some of us so crazy. If I get a phone call from a guy at 4 a.m. and he's thinking about drinking or sticking a pistol in his mouth or in somebody else's head, it's usually because of a sexual relationship that's gone sideways on him. It makes him insane. Because the greater the self-centered fear, the greater the insanity. Right? And it's the one area where you can have self-centered fear, because all of your instincts can be threatened. And so what do? It says we list those relationships. And I ask myself these questions. Where had I been selfish? Well, when you do that through your whole life in every relationship, man, you start, man, every single time. Is that the truth was, even though I dressed it up and I could be so loving and attentive and all this other crap, the real truth was, it was all about me. I could act loving and other-centered and altruistic, but the real truth was, I want something. I want your love. I want your attention. I want to get laid. I want not to be alone. I want companionship. It's all about me. And I realized, I looked back through and I thought, oh my God, I'm such a me-first person. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. And the second question, dishonesty, I found that most problems in this arena come from dishonesty. And it's often a delusional dishonesty where we don't even get that we're being dishonest. It's that we try to write checks we can't cash. It's a psychotic, wishful thinking. It's really not this way, but God, I want it to be this way so badly, I imagine it is. when it's not. Right? I think I run into guys all the time, and I think there's a little bit of this in every one of us. This hole inside of us, we misinterpret. And what happens when you take the alcohol and drugs out of your life, and you're 2 years sober and you haven't worked the steps, and you got this big vacancy? It starts looking a little bit easily like a relationship-shaped hole. Right? Doesn't it? You start thinking, what's missing? And you get all of a sudden you start looking around your home group, looking around the gym, looking around work, right? Driven by self. It's really a God-shaped hole. You know how you know that? Because you can try to fill it with an endless series of people, and it never gets full. It's always the same thing, over and over and over again. I heard a guy years ago say something I thought was very true. He says, you have no hope of having a healthy relationship until you no longer need one. Right? If all you're bringing to the table is vacancy, then that's all you're bringing to the table. Relationships are for whole people. They're not. You can't make a whole person with 2 crippled children. You can't do. I mean, it's a nice dance, but it just doesn't work. I'll tell you a couple types of dishonesty. I heard this many years ago. This story about this guy and this gal that both got sober around the same time, and their sponsors had both told them not to be sexually involved with anybody for a year. Some of you are going to find this hard to believe. They actually did that. But by the time the year came, they were kind of over ready. You know what I mean? And for the last 2 months, they'd been making cow eyes at each other across the home group. You know how you've seen that in AA. You see it in AA. And one day at the coffee bar at the break in the speaker meeting, they bump into each other and go into heat. You can get a suntan standing around somebody like that. Oh, man. And they go into that, they start dating, and they're in that infatuation stage of a relationship. It's like you took some amazing drug, man. It's like, do you ever know when you're in that infatuation, it's like, the sky's bluer than it's ever been. Oh, she's so brilliant and funny, and life's good. God really loves me now. You're nuts. You should be locked up, man. You're crazy. But it's a wonderful drug, man. I'm telling you. And they're in that infatuation stage. And one Saturday afternoon, he says to her, sweetheart, what are you doing tomorrow afternoon? She goes, oh, I don't know. What are you doing? He says, well, the big football game's on. I don't know if you like football, but if you come over and watch the football game with me, I thought, if you like that, would you like to do that? She says, oh, I'd love that. Yes. Well, she hates football, the truth is. But at that stage in their relationship, she'd have gone to a rock fight with this guy. And been glad to get hit with stones, and he loves me, Well, you get it. Let me say, I'm not just. Guys are worse. So if you think I'm targeting women, guys are worse. I'll get to that in a minute. So they eventually end up living together and are engaged to be married, and everything's wonderful. And a year later, Sunday morning, she says to him, I want you to come to the mall this afternoon with me. We got to pick some stuff out for the place. And he says, oh, sweetheart, not this afternoon. The big game's on. I thought we'd sit in the sofa, I'll make some popcorn, watch the game. And she flips out. She starts yelling at him, I hate that football. And he's looking at her like, who are you? What did aliens steal my girlfriend? Who are you? And she never set out to lie to him. We don't lie because we're liars. We lie because we're afraid. We write checks we can't cash, hoping that maybe it will be true. Guys are worse. There's a time in a relationship between a man and a woman where they've been dating a while and they haven't slept with each other. And then that night comes and you can feel it in the air. It's going to happen. And there's a point about a minute out from the consummation of the sexual act where a woman can stop a guy and say, sweetheart, before we go any further, do you really, really love me and want to spend the rest of your life with me? And the guy will go, he's like the Alpo dog on the commercial that they haven't fed in a week. You know, and you can put him on a lie detector, and when he's saying yes, it'll say he's telling the truth. Square business. I have a friend who was in that spot, and a day or two later, she pulls up to his place pulling a U-Haul. She got rid of her apartment, packed her stuff up, and he's looking at the U-Haul going, wow, what's that? And he said, but you said you wanted to spend the rest of your life with me. And he's going, oh, yeah, I did, didn't I? Oh, man. I have a friend he doesn't go to AA anymore, but he's very involved in another 12-step program, and he tells his sponsees, look, you can sleep with them, just don't talk to them because you're going to probably lie. And where does this come from? It comes from this self-centered fear, this fear of not being loved, the fear. Just like fears and resentments, these are judgments that I must try to dismantle that are part of this ego that has told me things that are part of my old ideas. It told me things like, as you are, you're not enough. Nobody's going to love you as is. So what happens is you have to write checks you can't cash. You have to be something more than what you are. I know a gal and a guy that fell in love, and they were engaged to be married. And before they got married, they had the money talk, a very, very important talk, where you talk about finances and debt and everything. And the guy asked her, he said, you ever had a bankruptcy? And she says, oh, no. She was working on her second one. Matter of fact, if she didn't marry this guy, she was going to be in one pretty quick because her credit cards were maxed out. He said, do you have any credit card debt? She says, oh, no, I don't believe in carrying a balance on my credit cards, because she had heard him talk to his sponsees and tell him about how you don't carry a balance. That's a sucker bet. You always pay things off right away. You can't, if you're in AA, you can't go bankrupt because you're using a technicality to beat somebody out of something. You're spiritually bound to make that right. And so why did she say all that? Because she believed an old lie, and the lie was, if he really knew these things about me that aren't right, he probably won't love me. The problem is that they got married, and of course all of that stuff comes to the surface. Of course it does. You financially mix yourself with someone, and eventually it comes to the surface, and now it's eroding the foundation of the relationship. And when the relationship fell apart, her ego said, see, you were right when he found out about your imperfections. He didn't love you. And that's not the deal. That was her mistake. She mistooking the truth from it. The truth was, if she would have, I know this guy, if she would have said to him, sweetheart, I've screwed my life up financially. My credit cards are maxed out. I believe he would have said, okay, I love you. We're going to work with this. I think I'll handle the money, but we're going to work with this. And she was this close to finding out the sweetest thing she could have ever found out, is someone would actually love her as is. But her ego told her the lie, and she believed it. And when the marriage fell apart, see, the ego said, see, when he did find out about you, see? And that wasn't the truth. And how much we reinforce that stuff in ourselves over and over again. You want to go for a few little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll tell you for a minute.
Okay.
Trust is a yes or no question. I'm working with a guy right now who has done some financial things that he hid from his wife, and then he finally had to admit it. And now she thinks he's having an affair. He's not. He's not. But she has no reason to trust him. I don't trust you in all of these categories, but not in that one. Trust is a yes or no question. Before I go on, I want to put in a plug for, I don't know what happens at this particular retreat, but you don't want to miss my wife's talk tonight. If you're not in Al-Anon, don't miss it anyway. She's got some fabulous stuff. The other thing is, I want to remind you that we're going to start tomorrow morning at 8:30, not 9 o'clock, as the schedule says. Because if I don't write this stuff down, it don't happen for me either. A couple of pieces here, strangely enough. I went to my mentor. And I said, this thing about we don't want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. I said, help me with that. What do you do with a new guy? He said, well, if he's married, pretty clear. If he's single, this is what I say to him. I'm going to ask you to leave the women alone until I get you all the way through the 12 steps. There are two reasons for that. The first one is that I want your time and energy on this step work. The second one is, as sick as you are, healthy women generally run screaming from guys like you. Now, you may currently have one fooled. That does happen. But generally, they run screaming from guys like you. If I can get you through these 12 steps, one of the things that happens is we get you healthy, put you in a position to have a chance to attract a healthy female. It's one of the side effects. But our old friend Keith used to say that two newcomers dating is like having two ticks and no dog. They're just sucking each other dry. And I think that's just about right. And
two ticks and no dog.
yeah, and I really took that from my teacher, and I said, that makes perfect sense to me. So I present that to the new guy. And I said, now you can choose to, this is some more from him, you can choose to ignore my recommendation in this category, and I won't drop you as a sponsee for doing that, but don't bring me the problems you create for yourself in this category. I've already told you what I think you need to do. See, and that solves my problem, right? And then the truth is, I'll handle the first one with him and point at all of these facts. And then after that, I really don't want to hear it. I've already told you. You want to keep, the first rule of holes, it's when you're in one, quit digging. If he can't quit digging, I can't help him in that category anyway. What I like to do is, like he said, a column inventory. It just says we got this down on paper and looked at it. It doesn't tell us how. I like to use whom had we hurt for a first column. Works pretty good. Subject, dishonest, inconsiderate. Last column is where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? And I'm going to share mine with you for a single reason, is there may be people in here who will die if I don't. Part of what happened for me in this process is I became comfortable enough with my past in God's hands for Him to use it. And part of what keeps it clean and light and airy instead of having the stench it used to have is my willingness for Him to use it. So I'm going to share this with you. My last column only has 3 entries, and it says I should have told her the truth, or it says I should have left her alone, or it says I should have told him no. That's what it says. I had my last homosexual experience when I was 19 years old. I am a raging heterosexual. I never liked it. My father had beaten me down so hard psychologically that I was unable to tell anybody no for any reason, for anything. I was 19 when I was able to do that. I'm not attacking homosexuals. I sponsor a homosexual guy who the worst thing he ever did was try to have a heterosexual relationship. Okay? I understand that. But that's just how it was for me. I have a therapist friend who says somewhere around 50 or 60% of adult heterosexual males have had a homosexual experience of some kind. Bob and I have compared notes. We believe between us we've heard around 300 fifth steps. We think the number's in the 90s. We spoke with a lady friend of ours who's sober over 40 years. And we asked her about women in the fifth step she'd heard. She said it's around 80%. So if that's the one that's eating one of you guys, come talk to me. I'd be more than happy to talk to you. That's usually the one they can't dump in step 5. It's the one that's killing you. Do you observe me that I don't change any when I shared all that stuff with you? Can you see that there's no weight on that for me anymore? I believe that's available to everybody. Not just that particular instance, but whatever it is. Whatever it is. That's what this thing is about, is a new freedom. The old freedom was 4 shots of tequila. This is a new freedom. It has to be new. And I have to do other things to get it. And then it tells us in this next paragraph, why are we doing all this? It says to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. Was it selfish or not? And it says we ask God, oh my goodness, we're going to talk to God about sex. Well, I have news. He's the one that invented it. Do you ever think about that? Nice job. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I really do. And so I'm going to talk to him about my ideal. And so I asked this guy I'm sponsoring, talk to God about your ideal. And I want you to write it down. The ideal, by the way, does not have to do with her dress size or the color of her hair. It has to do with your behavior, given your current set of circumstances today. For example, if you're currently single, we don't need to know what it would be if you were married but temporarily separated, but not legally separated, but you thought she had a boyfriend, but you weren't sure. We don't need that one, Stanley. You're working too hard. Let's get the today word into this thing. What do you think God wants you to do / not do in this category today? Mine is simple. I'm married to a spectacular woman. Miss Linda's supposed to get all of my sex energy. It's that simple. I'm 65 years old. I have some good news for you guys who are afraid you're going to live to be 65. I have some really good news for you. And then I tell the guy, I tell him, if you want to read me your sexual your ideal, I'd be happy to hear it, but I don't require that. But I'll tell you, when you're writing it, if you go past about 3 lines, you didn't understand the concept. But let's get it on paper so you really know what it is. Not to be used lightly or despised or loathed. And then we're supposed to be willing to grow toward this thing. It's okay if I make a couple of mistakes. Actually, not anymore. It's not. But when somebody is new, I think it's okay if they make a couple of mistakes. That's what it says here. And we're asking God in meditation what we should do about each specific matter. And here's the willingness again to make amends if we've done harm. Sounds again like step 8. On page 70, it says, suppose we fall short. That paragraph sums up, and what it says very simply is, if you're doing things in the sexual arena that are hurting God's kids, you're going to drink. That wasn't maybe. And if I see someone I sponsor doing that, I tell them, because that's what it says here. And if they continue to do things that are harming people, I can't work with them. If somebody's doing something that's going to take them back to the bar and they won't stop it, I can't help them. They've proven to me I can't help them. That's what I do. I'm not recommending that to anybody. And then it says, to sum up about sex, oh my goodness, we're praying again for the right ideal, for guidance in each questionable situations, for sanity, strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. Some friends of mine and I, as we do our 2 pages, we read 2 pages a day in the big book, we started tracking all the places in the book that reference helping others. We found over 60 so far. And that's not in the stories. That's the early Roman numerals through 164. And if you want that list, if you'll email me, I'll be happy to send them to you. We throw ourselves the harder in helping others, think of their needs, work for them, takes us out of ourselves and quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. And then this next paragraph is what pilots call a checklist. It says if we've been thorough about our personal inventory, we've written down a lot. If you've written all of the things that we discovered today that are written in step 4, and you've never done an actual 4-step before, probably you've written down a lot. Then it says we've listed and analyzed our resentments. We covered that, didn't we? We had a list. We did a lot of analysis. We covered that. We've begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. Yeah, we killed you 7 times on that 1 page. We've commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We covered that, didn't we? We've begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even our enemies. We look on them as sick people. We covered that, didn't we? We've listed the people we've hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. We found that at the end of the resentment inventory. We also just found it toward the end of the sexual misconduct inventory. I would propose to you, if you've done something that somebody else alleged to you as a 4-step, and you can't answer yes to everything in that paragraph, you might try the real 4-step. I think you will find it to be a life-changing experience. It was for me and for the men I've had the privilege of working with where we began to dig the poison out of the soul. There's a tremendous cleansing that comes from laying down those resentments, beginning to outgrow the fears, to step out into the sunlight of the Spirit on this sex thing and do it the way it's supposed to be done. It's a whole different ball game. Whole different thing between making love and getting laid are different. And I didn't know that. And it says in this book, you read it again and again, faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves. We hope you're convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from Him. If you've already made a decision, that would be the 3rd-step decision we talked about, and an inventory of your gross or handicaps. That's what we covered today. You've made a good beginning. That being so, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. I studied biology. I know what happens after swallow and digest, right? That stuff's out of here. And step 4 is about out of here. It's about out of here. Powerful, powerful stuff. We're going to move on. I'm going to start on 5.
When do we end? I forget.
Quarter after.
Okay.
We got 30 minutes. You want to start on 5?
No, go ahead.
Okay. We make this up at the breaks.
I say one thing?
We really do. Yeah.
For a friend of mine says that, look, I don't have an opinion on this. He says that looking for a mate in Alcoholics Anonymous is like shopping in the dented cans section of the grocery store. You might get a good set of niblets, but you might get botulism too. We don't know.
Yeah, at my home group, we say dating before you've actually done the 12 steps is like pouring Miracle Grow on your character defects. Yeah, it'll just make you absolutely crazy. Moving on to page 70, at the end of the first paragraph, it said this brings us to the fifth step in the program of recovery. So there's a 72. The 72. That's a reference to the fact that this is our program of recovery again. And about 4 lines from the bottom, the best reason first, if we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking. So that's a reason to do step 5. Fairly decent one, I think. On page 73, first full paragraph, more than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. He's very much the actor. This is the actor thing. You remember we talked about on page 60. He wants to run the whole show. Now he wants to run what they think of him. But it's the same actor. Presents a stage character, the one he likes his fellows to see. He wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but knows in his heart he doesn't deserve it. That's my story. Bottom of the page, we must be entire. We know we're skipping a lot of great stuff here. Our mission isn't to cover it all. It's not our mission. If we expect to live long or happily in this world. And we think well before we choose the person to whom we're going to give this fifth step. And I think we all know that there aren't any rules in Alcoholics Anonymous. The first one is mentioned here on page 74. At the bottom of the page, you see the word notwithstanding. Count up 3 lines above that. The rule is that we must be hard on ourselves, but always considerate of others. I can't do my fifth step with somebody that may harm. Can't do it. I've seen so many people go out to make amends, and they dump their fifth step on their mother or their wife. It's a horrible thing to do. Horrible thing to do. Be very careful. I heard a discussion about who should hear it. The men I sponsor are free to do their fifth step with anybody they want to, and me. I'm going to be there. And if they need to do it with a priest and so on, I'm great with that. I don't have a problem with it. I plan to be there. This is an experience out of my past. My sponsor used to run a treatment facility, and I was doing some part-time stuff down there. And we had a guy come in on Monday morning just devastated. On Saturday, he had done his fifth step with his preacher. On Sunday morning, his preacher had delivered his fifth step to the congregation with him and his wife sitting there and his name tied to it. So do what you need to do. Yeah. And I saw the blood on that floor. And I don't know how that guy's doing now. I have no idea. But I'm telling you what. Anyhow. So I got to be careful about who I choose. And this thing about being considerate of others, Bob made a point when we were doing one of these a year or so ago. That's an awfully good way to approach step 9, too. And just for fun, while we're doing rules, I think there's one on maybe 101, 102, somewhere 102 maybe?
2,
yeah. Is there? No, bottom of 101.
Yeah, 101.
Yeah. Paragraph near the bottom. So our rule, we don't have any rules. Here's the next one. Our rule is not to avoid a place where there is drinking if we have legitimate reason to be there. It goes on to say that, and make sure my spiritual house is in order. And then the other rule that I've found here is on page 118 in the chapter 2 Wives. A guy I sponsor says it's only misprint in the book. T-O, 2 wives, should be T-W-O, 2 wives. That's the average. Page 118. Paragraph begins in the middle of the page with we women. Count up 3 lines above. Live and let live is the rule. Just for fun. Back on page 75, we talk about the fact that this is a life or death thing. And what I see is a one-sentence direction on how to do step 5. It says we pocket our pride and go to it illuminating. That means to shine light into. Illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. And I'd like to ask him, before we start, are you nervous? If a guy's doing his first fifth step, are you nervous? If he says no, we're wasting our time because he already knows what he's not going to tell me. And I shared that with a guy I sponsored, had about 1.5 years, and he's going to hear his first fifth step. And he said to the guy, are you nervous? The guy said, no. And Rick said to him, you already know what you're not going to tell me. He said the guy came apart, bawling, snot slinging, and told him the whole truth right there. They were done with that fifth step very quickly because it's that simple. If he's not nervous, he knows what he's not going to tell me. If he's nervous, he's either going to tell me or he's not sure. I'll take either one of those. I'll take either one. And we're going to sit down prayerfully. We got the phones turned off. We got some Kleenex. We got some drinks. We had restroom. We're by ourselves. And I'm going to ask him to pray for clarity of mind and courage to say what he needs to say. And I'm going to ask God to make me perfect. The book says I can do that on page 13. Last full paragraph, 4 lines from the bottom of that paragraph. Never was I to pray for myself except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. And I ask him to make me perfect when I sit to hear a fifth step. I find no directions on how to hear a fifth step, and all I have is what my lineage passed to me. And my lineage, we don't hear fifth steps, we exchange them. And we do this prayer thing, and then I say to him, I want you now to tell me the single worst thing you ever did. I want it right now. And when he tells me, then I tell him when I did that, and the odds are good I did. And then I want the next worst thing you ever did, and I tell him when I did that, and he may hit one that I didn't do. And we do that until he can't think of one. If he misses one of my big ones, I make sure he hears that from me. And then we reference his 4-step and look around and see if he's missed anything. That's just how I do it. Fifth steps are running somewhere right around 2 hours these days. They can go for days and days and days if we do the free form thing and just, tell me about it. It can take forever, especially a guy not sure he's going to tell it all. He can take forever getting to the big stuff. And I found if I get the big stuff out early, it happens pretty fast. I then like to read him. When he believes he's finished and I believe he's finished, I ask a series of questions. Have you harmed any human being or have you hurt an animal? I'm surprised how many of us have beaten dogs. There's a big number on that. Have you had a homosexual experience? Even if he's already given one, I ask if there's another. Have you had sex with an animal or a family member? And please don't read between these lines, okay? I'm going to talk about something here that's politically a fairly hot topic these days. I ask him if he's been involved in an abortion. There are a lot of people who are just fine with that, and that suits me fine. I don't have a comment on that. There's some of us that's the heaviest load we're carrying. And some of them have got it buried down so deep they can't even find it. And so I asked that question. And then I asked him if there's anything they had decided not to tell me, or they were unsure whether they would tell me, either of those. And then if I think he's finished and he thinks he's finished, I read him the 5th step promises here on page 75, which is the balance of that paragraph, and tell him that he's finished the first half of step 5. And then the book says, returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we have done. I want you to go home. Now, if you don't have a home that you can go to that's safe, you can stay here. This will be your home for now. If you drive home, I don't want you to turn your cell phone on. I don't want you to turn on the radio. I don't even want you to listen to one of my CDs. I mean, this is commitment. This is commitment we're talking about here. All right? I want you to mentally hold the space. You go home. He says, we thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know him better, because I also tell him at the end that I forgive him, that I believe God does, and that by the time we finish step 9, I believe he will have forgiven himself. It's been my experience. Taking the book down from the shelf. I'll expect you to go home, put your book on a shelf. It'll need to be shoulder level or higher. I'm going to want to know about that tomorrow. I will be asking. That's ridiculous, and I require it. That's what it says. And then, without reading the balance of this paragraph, what it says is you sit for an hour and talk to God about those first 5 steps. Have you been thorough? Call me. Somewhere approaching 50% of the time, I get a phone call within the next 24 hours that he just did flat forget something. Just forgot it. Great, no problem. We take that one on the phone. Don't worry about it. I see it's not quite half, but it's pretty close. See a lot of that. Top of 76 says, if we can answer to our satisfaction, that's what we've been through with the first 5 after 1 hour. We then look at step 6. Oh, steps 5 and 6 are apparently done the same day. We emphasize willingness. Are we now ready for God to remove all the things we've admitted are objectionable? Can he take them all, every one? And then here's a very cleverly concealed 6th-step prayer. If we cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. And then it says, when ready, oh my goodness, looks like 7's done that same day too. We say something like this, my Creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. Pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. And here's the amen we talked about before. Kind of interesting. I swear this wasn't here. I thought that I was asking God to remove all my defects of character. It's not what it says. It's just the ones that stand in the way of my usefulness. It had never occurred to me that I wouldn't ask him to take them all. And it hadn't occurred to me that God could possibly use one or more of my character defects as tools to help me. And I had that experience a couple of years ago. What we do here is a little bit on the dangerous side. I mean, it's okay if you think one of us is great. It's not okay if we do. And I get to thinking I was. I had too many people telling me I was great and I changed lives, and I started believing it myself. Okay if you put me on a pedestal, not okay if I do. And I got up on the pedestal. And I came pretty close to doing something that would have been pretty bad. And I came down off that pedestal. And God used that character defect as a tool to help me. It's a powerful God. It's an amazing process. My sponsor said that the book doesn't say anything at all about me working on my character defects. And when I work on the character defects, I am living in the problem. And that all of my character defects are self-centered. There are no exceptions to that. And self can't push self out of the center. If it could, it would leave a vacuum. So the answer to my character defects is not for me to work on them. The answer to my character defects is for me to do the things that you've taught me to do to lead a God-centered life. And when I do that, my character defects just recede. It's not like I take power over them. They just recede. What I do is invite the light in and the darkness flees, because the darkness cannot exist in the light. So I don't focus on the darkness. I get involved with the light. And that's how I get changed. That's what happens to me. Somebody asked me a while back, do I think the path gets narrower? And I think the best answer I ever heard was, if I stay on the center line, I won't notice.
Thanks, Scott. There's an old adage in Alcoholics Anonymous that if 3 frogs were sitting on a log and one of them made a decision to jump in the water, how many frogs are still on the log? And some new guy will say, well, 2, and the old timer will go, no, he only made a decision. He's still on the log. If you were to carry out the decision, it would be in step 7 that you'd hear the splash. This is really where we set down all our defense mechanisms and become entirely ready. And this is a very small little step in a very small little paragraph on the top of page 76, and yet I think it encompasses the story of a lot of our sobriety, how we become entirely ready. My sponsor tells a story. He uses an analogy that I think is pretty good. He said that we're so beaten by the bag and the bottle that we come to AA and we're forced to throw the towel in. And then what happens is the ego sneaks back in there when nobody's looking. We kind of get the towel back, and we'll spend the rest of our lives ripping off little pieces of it and throwing it back in. As we get to that place where God is either everything or he's nothing about the IRS. He's everything or he's nothing about the police. He's everything or nothing about the relationship, the children, the job, the judgments in AA, the lust, the gambling, the food, or whatever the deal is. We keep throwing in the pieces of the towel. How do we become entirely ready? Well, Scott talked about not working on your character defects, and I went through a period of sobriety, about 5 or 6, I don't know, quite a few years of my sobriety where I did an honest look at me. I could see these things were objectionable. I could see where they cut me off from the sunlight of the Spirit. They kept me entrenched in self and all that stuff. But I thought it's my job to not be that way anymore. And what I discovered is, if in defects of character, if you try to willfully overcome them, what happens is you become the reformed whatever. You know, like a reformed smoker who is so intolerant of other people who smoke, who's up on the high horse all the time, you know, that guy. You become the reformed whatever. And so I spent, I had this tremendous bottom with judgment in AA. I mean, I was, sitting in meetings taking people's inventory. And so I decided, I'm not coming to, I didn't go to God with it. I said, I'm just not going to be that way ever again. And what I became is I was no longer, I wasn't doing that anymore, but I became very judgmental of people who were judgmental. right? Which makes me exactly like them, right? It's like whatever in the universe, for every reaction there's an opposite and equal reaction. Whatever I try to overcome with self-will seems to give it power. Confucius once said that the chains that bind us most closely are the ones we have broken. If I'm fighting something, if I'm a reformed something, I am still as hostage to that as when I was doing it. We're not talking about we're talking about something greater than that. We're talking about a new freedom. We're not talking about fighting something. Remember what happens to us with alcohol. Later in the 10th step, it says we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. And I think that is absolutely the case with defects of character. Because there's later on in the book, it talks about fighting stuff with self-will, and it says it is our experience, it's referring to drinking, that if we do that, we always will break out in a bigger explosion than ever. Right? I sponsored a guy. I started sponsoring him back in about 1980 or 81, I guess. Good guy. And he... We did some step work, and he had a couple defects of character that he really had a hard time with, and they were defects that had caused him a lot of problems. It threatened him to go to prison for a long time. Involved some behaviors that are not looked on very well in this society, and you can go to jail for a long time, and you have a hard time in jail. It's really kind of a bad deal. And yet he was obsessed with some of this stuff, so he made up his mind he would just he's never going to do that. And for as far as I know, for 14 years of his sobriety, he fought that with self-will. And it was some sexual behavior. And what happened is he became the most judgmental person about other people's sexual conduct I've ever seen in Alcoholics Anonymous. Unbelievable. He was judgmental of heterosexuals, he was every sexual behavior, every date, people dating, he always had something snide and condescending to say about it. Because he was the reformed guy, right? And the reason he couldn't, and I told him one time, you got to take, do step 6. He never could do step 6 and 7 with it, because he believed that it was he had such a strong judgment on it that he believed he had to overcome this in order for him and God to be okay. So for 14 years, he didn't act out on the behavior. And then 14 years through the internet, he hooked up with some people that were into that kind of stuff, and he got back into it. And what happened is he couldn't tell me about it, and he couldn't take it to God because he was ashamed of himself. And he would act out on some of this behavior, and he would sink into a deep depression, like an emotional hangover as a result of it. And a doctor in Alcoholics Anonymous who was not a psychiatrist, who didn't even interview him, just was at a meeting, and the guy was depressed, and he said, "Here, take these," and gave him pills for the depression that allowed him to continue the behavior. Well, about a year later, then now the antidepressants aren't enough anymore, and now he can't sleep. And now he calls me up one day and he says, "I need to talk to you." And I said, "Yeah, I haven't talked to you in a while." He hadn't been calling me. I said, "What's going on?" He says, "Well, my doctor wants me to take sleeping pills, and I think I need to take them." I said, "Rob," I said, "you can't take sleeping pills." He says, No, it's not like you think. It's not. I said, "Listen, if you can't sleep, there's a reason. We need to find out." He says, No, it's not like that. He says, it's an adverse reaction to the antidepressants. And I said, "I'm supposed to be a sponsor." I said, "You're on antidepressants?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "How long have you been on those?" He says, "Oh, about a year." I said, "How come you didn't tell me?" It didn't mean anything. I just didn't think you needed to know." "Oh, okay." Well, I said to him, "Look, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't know about antidepressants. I don't know. That's something a psychiatrist should decide. But I know one thing. Alcoholics, I don't believe, should take sleeping pills. If you can't sleep, there's a reason you can't sleep. And let's find out what that is." And he said, "Oh, no, it's not that at all. I need this. It's a chemical reaction to the other medication, etc." And he started taking them. Well, a little bit later, he had a heart incident, and he had to have some surgery. And when they put him on pain pills as a matter of standard procedure for that kind of surgery, it just took off. Within no time at all, his brother comes and gets me, and he says, Rob's in trouble. And we go to the hospital, and he's in intensive care. He's strapped down. He was doing over 30 Lortabs a day from all different doctors, and now they checked that stuff, and now they all found out at the same time. They all cut him off on the same day. So he went an instant withdrawal. He's in danger of cardiac arrest or stroking out because now his blood pressure's off the charts, and they have him strapped down in intensive care, and he's kicking all these narcotics, and plus Ativan and some other benzos and some stuff, and he was in bad shape. I walk into the room where he's strapped out, and the first thing he says when he sees me, he starts crying. He goes, "This doesn't mean I have to change my sobriety date, does it?" The amazing power of the ego, isn't that? Now here's a guy who's dying, and he's caring about how he looks, right? I mean, that's kind of bizarre, really. And I just said, look, let's just get you straightened out. We'll talk about that later. Well, he refused to change his sobriety date. I was at his 16th birthday. He was so stoned on pills, he was slurring his words. He was going, "Now I'm going to talk. I want my hear from my sponsor," right? And I didn't know what to say. He called on me in the meeting. I did the kindest, honest thing I could do. I just said, "I'd like to congratulate Rob on 16 years of not drinking alcohol." And that was true, and it was kind, and it was honest. And he eventually, within 2 months after that, he drank again. You know, that thing inside of us, there's a spiritual mechanism where we're compelled to make our insides match our outsides. You know, the need for continuity within us it's a powerful thing. And within a year after that, he was dead. And he was dead because he could not bring something to the table in step 6, right? All he had to do was ask God, but he couldn't do it. And I understand that. I had a lot of things I couldn't bring to God. I was afraid. Eventually, over the years, what happens is you get worn out with some of this stuff. And I discovered that a lot of my defects of character, I would have to it'd be very much like drinking. I have to get to a place with the defect that I got to in drinking. Now, what did happen to me with drinking? Is I got to a place where I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I can drink till it kills me. There's no more value in drinking. There's no more fun in it. As long as I secretly thought there was a party there, I'm not really ready for AA yet. Not really. I could intellectually think, well, you really should stop drinking. This is really hurting you. But as long as I think there's a party in there somewhere, I ain't ready. And as long as I secretly thought there was value in these defective defense mechanisms, I ain't ready. It don't make me a bad guy. It just makes me the way I am. And what are the values? I mean, I would like, and here's what happened to me. I started praying about some of this stuff. I'd start asking God to remove it. But I'm a hypocrite. I don't really want God to remove the defect. I want him to remove the consequences. In Bill's story, there's a thumbnail sketch of him going through the steps with Ebby in the hospital. And in that thumbnail sketch, he says something different. He says, when he's talking about step 6 and 7, he says he asked his creator to remove these things, root and branch, as if there's 2 parts. And I know about the branch, that's the consequences. That's the thing that's poking me in the eye. But what's the root? What's the secret, hidden idea of value or something, or gratification from the defect? I mean, I know everybody would like the branch of resentment to be removed. I mean, nobody likes that you can't sleep and your head's going like a rotisserie all night and there's no peace. Nobody likes walking into a room and that person's there and you just think, and seizes up. Or the person you resent, somebody tells you, hey, did you know they just bought a nice new car? And you go, ah, right? I'd like to be free from that, but am I willing to give up the pleasure of judgment? You can't be free of one without the other. It's like saying to God, take away the hangovers, but let me drink. It's a package of cause and effect. And Chamberlain used to say that this was a process of uncovering, discovering, and discarding. I have to get the truth. I have to awaken to the realization that there is this thing that I think is defending me against a life that is threatening, a life that is vacant, a life that is desolate, a life that is lonely, isn't really working. That all the things I'm using to protect me are actually exasperating the things I'm trying to protect myself against. And they make it worse because they're defective. And that's the problem, is I'm afraid to let go of the known for something that is unknown. Paul, an old friend of mine, Paul, who's actually stories in the book, who died a few years ago, Paul said there's a sense of security in the familiar no matter how painful it may be. There's an old TV show I saw when I was a little kid. It was called Rescue 8. And it was a wonderful episode. And it's funny how you remember stuff, but I remembered this episode. And these two paramedics, their job was to go out and help people that were in trouble. And this one episode, they come out on this call, and there's this little girl, cute little girl, and she's stuck with her arm wedged into a vending machine. And she's crying, and she's upset, and her parents are there, and they're upset. And now the firemen are showing up, and they're pulling saws and torches off the truck, and they're going to cut this door off, and all this equipment is scaring the girl. It's scaring the parents. It's making it worse, and she's crying, and she's in a lot of pain, and please get me out of here. And the one fireman's just standing back watching all this, the one paramedic, and he looks at her, and he says, sweetheart, do you got something in your hand? And she went, uh-huh. What do you got in your hand? A candy bar. Well, sweetheart, can you let go of the candy bar? It's my candy bar. It's my candy bar. But we can't get you out unless you... It's my candy bar. But, sweetheart, we can't get you out unless you let go of the candy. It's my candy bar. And then he says to her, he says, sweetheart, if you will let go of that candy bar, I promise you, I will get you 2 candy bars. And because she finally trusted him, she said, really? And he said, I promise you. And she let go of the candy bar, and her hand slid right out of the vending machine. And I think sometimes with God and our defects of character, it's like that. Do I trust God enough to let down and give up these defenses? And that's really what they are. If you look at surrenders in movies, what happens? The person surrendering lays down all their ability to defend themselves. They discard their knives, their hand grenades, their rifles, their pistols. They make themselves utterly defenseless, and they sit on the side of the road and they wait for someone to come along and tell them what to do. And what's our experience is we surrender, and everything we are trying to protect ourselves and get, we get. And we're safe and protected. We never had to protect ourselves to begin with. I'll tell you a little quick story about the Japanese. And we have time?
Yeah, we'll make time.
All right.
I love this story.
In the mid-1940s, the Japanese Empire was faced with extinction. 2 atomic weapons had been set off in 2 of their large industrial centers, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They had no atomic weapons. They had no defense against that. They were terrorized. I mean, they really were looking at extinction. They were looking at their ultimate destruction. And they were forced into a surrender very similar to some of us when we come to Alcoholics Anonymous, an absolute lack of alternatives. And they met with in the Pacific Fleet. Scott has a little story, tells sometimes about that. But the bottom line is that they signed the formal terms of surrender, which in essence was their 3rd step, which is our formal terms of surrender. But that was not the end. An inventory must be taken of all their defenses, their army, their cannons, their ships, their planes, and then they must be dismantled and rendered over to us to leave them virtually defenseless. And at that point, I can't imagine, I'll tell you, I can't imagine a more fear-wrought surrender, because they had to do that in the face of knowing that we knew what they did at Pearl Harbor, knowing about the Bataan Death March and the camps and the torture and all that stuff. They had to surrender and make themselves absolutely vulnerable to a person, to an entity that they had hurt extremely. I can't imagine a more fear-wrought surrender. Within no time at all after that surrender, they were forced into an ethic that all surrendered entities are forced into. We are an ethic of service, an ethic of moving yourself aside to serve a greater whole. And if you ever studied or looked at Japanese businesses back after, in the decades that followed World War II, they developed a tremendous ethic, and they started just rocking and rolling because the individual was no longer important. The whole was greater than the individual. And they had removed self out of the equation to serve a higher goal, a higher purpose. And within 4 decades of a surrender, of living a surrender and a life of service, the Japanese owned more of the United States than they could have ever conquered or held by military means. I was over in Maui, was visiting some friends I was over actually in Japan, but I was over in Maui at the height of their oh man, we're not even talking about billionaires in Japan, just regular guys. Their standard of living was so high. They would come to Hawaii and just say, I'll buy those 4 houses there. The real estate market in Hawaii just went sky high because they had such income. They had such spendable income. They had the highest standard of living in the world, and not just the highest by a little bit. I mean, it was really up there. And then I was over in Japan for an AA convention in 1990, and I watched the beginning of their demise. I watched the new generation who didn't care for this selflessness and this honor, and they were the me first generation. They were the generation that wanted to wear American clothes. They were the generation that wanted to listen to American rock and roll. They were the generation that didn't respect the old ways. They were the self-centered, narcissistic generation. I'm a food guy. I love gourmet foods. Japan at that time, and still to this day, has some of the greatest chefs in the world. If you ever read, the original Iron Chef was all Japanese chefs. Unbelievable. Food is an art form. And I went to some of the greatest restaurants I've ever been to in Japan. There was one restaurant in Tokyo that you couldn't get into. There was a line 2 blocks long in 1990. McDonald's. I saw that and I thought, oh, put a fork in them. They're done. And what happened to them is the same thing that happens to us. Self starts inundating it back. How many times we see newcomers, I'll surrender, I just want to help people. Yes, I'll make the amends, anything. And then 3 years later, the ego's back and all they care about is themselves. When the entity fills up with self, the spirit starts to die. There's only so much room. It's either self or spirit. And the more you bring in one, that pushes out the other.
Our great teacher told me one time that the alcoholic is like an electromagnet that's been dragged through the junkyard of life. We got all this rusty, sharp, nasty, jagged, ugly stuff stuck all over us. And what we do with these steps is we very slowly turn the power down and eventually off, and this stuff begins to fall away. And this beautiful thing I've always really been emerges from the inside of that. We're not going to change me into something. We're going to teach me to quit having all of those things that I no longer need. And God was not having a bad day in the middle of a long losing streak when He came up with me or any of you. We were wrong. It didn't happen that way. And as I learned to lay down all of those defenses, this beautiful thing that we've always been emerges. We are going to start again at 33 minutes after the hour.